This is yet another series where I barely played the games, so most of these were my first time through. This list is based on how fun the games are to me and how well they hold up. I'll be including the Diddy Kong Racing titles, but not the Mario vs. Donkey Kong series, and that's because of these polls that I ran on this channel. But with that, grab yourself a banana and let's get her ranked. 34. Donkey Kong Jr. Game & Watch. While there's a few variants of the Game & Watch titles, I stuck with the original versions for this video. The goal of Donkey Kong Jr. is to free Donkey Kong by grabbing a key and swinging over to him. However, I didn't manage to do this because, well, just look at it. This barely counts as a video game as it is, and there's a bunch of birds and snapjaws that kept getting in the way. The controls are incredibly stiff, and it was really annoying having to wait for the enemies to get out of the way before I could head towards the key. I thought it was pretty awful, but I'll admit that these are charming little games for the 80s. 33. Donkey Kong 2 Game & Watch. This is kind of a sequel to Donkey Kong Jr., as the goal is the same: get a key to Donkey Kong to free him. The only difference is the layout is more complex, and you need to get 4 keys up top to free DK. The same problems are present here. The controls just suck, and jumping over enemies can be really annoying, seeing as they don't actually animate. It was slightly better just because of the more intricate layout, but that's all I can give this. 32. Donkey Kong Game & Watch. Technically, the first handheld game Nintendo ever released. It's the same concept as the arcade classic: climb the stairs and reach the top. This time, however, you have to pull a switch and time your jump to grab a crane to reach the top. You just repeat this over and over, and it's just fine. I really didn't like how limited your jumps are. These girders are in the way of your jumping range for like 50% of the screen, so that means you're really constrained with what you can do, and it requires a lot of waiting around until you can make progress. It was neat to try, but definitely not something I'd go back and play. 31. Donkey Kong 3 Game & Watch. An interesting take for this one. You play as Stanley and have to fill up a spray bottle. You'll then aim your spray bottle at bees to force them to sting Donkey Kong. The idea on its own is super bizarre, but it makes for an okay game. The controls are, again, kind of stiff, but at least it's more engaging and freeing than the other games I tried earlier. 30. Donkey Kong Jr. Math. There's one educational game in the franchise, and it's based on the original version of Donkey Kong Jr. All you're really doing here is basic math. Donkey Kong puts up a random number, and you have to grab the correct symbol and numbers to get the score. Not only does this barely qualify as educational, but climbing the vines is really awkward. It technically works, but sometimes you'll connect with a number and the game doesn't count it, so you have to move over it a couple times before it gets recognized. This is painfully unfun. It's only higher than some of the Game & Watch titles because the controls are more functional. 29. Donkey Kong Circus Game & Watch. This one is just weird. You control Donkey Kong that's balancing on a barrel, and you have to juggle pineapples without touching the flames. If you hit the flames or drop a pineapple, Mario starts laughing at you. It's so jarring to see this, considering Mario is the nicest motherfucker on the planet nowadays. The controls are actually responsive as well, and that alone makes it a bit more enjoyable than the others. 28. Donkey Kong Hockey Game & Watch. Another strange one. You're playing a game of hockey against the big monkey. You can move in 4 directions, which makes this the easiest game to control and play out of all the Game & Watch titles. I was honestly having a bit of fun with it, but the referee goes wild sometimes. He literally just shows up whenever he feels like it and changes the direction the puck is going in. I don't think I've ever played a hockey game where the ref is allowed to interfere with the game itself. 27. Donkey Kong Jr. Mario is having his revenge and has trapped the funny monkey, so you play as Donkey Kong Jr. to save him. And apparently, this version of DK that we're playing as is the current version of DK, so he's the only Mario character that canonically ages. As for the game itself, I didn't really care for it. The gameplay is very different to the original Donkey Kong, and I was not that big of a fan. The main idea is to climb these vines to use fruit to hit enemies, and reach the top to save DK. All 4 levels have unique ideas, which is nice, but the actual climbing mechanics are super confusing. If Junior is on one vine, then he moves up really slowly, but moves down really fast. But if he's on 2 vines, then moving up is slightly fast, and moving down is about the same speed. You can also jump from vine to vine, but it's kinda clunky. The simple fact that the speed that you climb the vines is so wonky and weird makes playing really cumbersome. I was forced to memorize these awkward speed changes, and I didn't find it to be very fun because of that. And you know what's really weird? The vine speed is consistent in Donkey Kong Jr. Math. Why are the controls better in the educational game? So, I don't know, man. DK Jr. is a cool premise, but I think simplicity works a lot better for an arcade game. They should have just kept the speeds all the same. 26. Donkey Kong 3. This is another strange game. You play as Stanley and have this spray bottle. You'll use that to attack a bunch of different enemies as well as Donkey Kong. You're also trying to protect your flowers at the bottom, and that's pretty much it. I like that it's a bit simpler, but this has really deviated a lot from what people liked about the original DK game. I can appreciate the smooth movement and being able to jump to different levels, but I just don't really care for this that much. These arcade games were made before Donkey Kong had any sort of established formula, so it makes sense why all three of these titles are so different. This one just doesn't have much charm to it. You're just hitting stuff with a bottle and it's not that enticing. 25. Donkey Kong. Nintendo's first huge hit in the arcades, and there are a ton of versions of this game. The one I played a lot as a kid was the Game Boy Advance version, and the NES one is fairly common as well. There's a total of 4 levels, although a lot of these versions only have 3. The levels are fairly unique and all have varied concepts amongst each other. You also have a catchy little jingle before the game starts, and the controls feel okay. Moving around is nice, but the jumps are locked in and can't be adjusted in the air, so that can make jumping over barrels a bit tricky as you have to be more prepared for how Mario is going to jump. The only method of attack is to grab a hammer, and this is effective to an extent. In a pinch it can be helpful, but you also can't jump or climb ladders while using it, so it doesn't help that much unless you're in the harder difficulties. The hitboxes also aren't perfect. You can die to a barrel while using the hammer. And also, Mario has the most fragile body on the planet. The man can't jump higher than like 2 feet without dying, so you have to make sure he doesn't jump that high. So for what it is, this is an okay game to try out once or twice, but it's really not worth playing beyond that. 24. Donkey Kong Barrel Blast. Hold up, a kart racer where you fly around in barrels and you can pick from a large variety of characters? Well, that sounds pretty awesome. They even managed to get Dixie and Tiny Kong in here. And look at all those Kremlings you can pick from. The idea is pretty similar to Mario Kart, with things like bananas replacing coins on the road. The difference with that is the bananas are accumulated to build up a charge meter, and you can use this charge to get a nice boost of speed. It's a great incentive to collect bananas compared to the coins in Mario Kart, which only make you go slightly faster. There's also barrels you can run through, which leads to alternate routes, or allow you to go faster. They're fun to spot and fly through. It's nice to see a big part of the DK franchise be integrated into a racing game so well. And of course, we've got items. These are very Mario Kart-esque and are objects or characters from the DK universe. Heck, Candy's Challenges is a bonus mode that's kind of like Mario Kart DS's mission mode. You'll complete a handful of specific challenges, and they're a pretty neat inclusion. Now, you might be thinking, why is this game so low on the list? Well, there's one problem. They completely f***ed up the controls. You want to know how to go right and left? You shake to go right and shake to go left. Why? What? There's a joke. This feels horrible to do! Not only is it tiring on your forearms, but simply making turns is difficult because the game only does turns in segments, and there's no real give to how quickly you'll move at once. You're literally locked into a grid system, which is really stupid for a kart racer, and every time you get hit, you slow down and have to shake the controllers to build speed again, which, guess what? That's kind of a big problem considering the fact that turning is with the same movements! And oh my god, Barrel Blast does everything in its power to slow you down. There's tons of obstacles all over the tracks, and while you can punch some of the barrels, not all barrels can be punched. So of course, you'd assume to just turn your character to avoid an obstacle. But no! Turning by shaking often takes too long and you'll just get hit, losing all the speed you built up. So what do you do as a plan B? You can jump in the air to safety, and that loses speed. So not only does jumping lose speed, but you also can't move around as easily in the air, so you have to hope that your committed jump doesn't lead you to getting hit by something anyway. What the hell happened here? I can't believe how much they messed this game up. Barrel Blast could have been a classic from the Wii library, but was instead destroyed because it just had to include the worst implementation for motion controls that I've ever seen in a racing game. Would it have killed them to not also offer the option to use the joystick? Or why not just have the motion controls be like a steering wheel? Mario Kart Wii has motion and stick controls, why can't Barrel Blast have both? This genuinely might be the most held-back Nintendo game of all time, all because the controls had to be different. 23. Donkey Kong Land. What a bizarre game we've got here. You might think that Donkey Kong Land is some downscaled version of Donkey Kong Country, but believe it or not, it's actually an entirely new game. It might not look very great, but this is Game Boy after all. They can only do so much. There's a good amount of levels to tackle, and while lots of themes are reused, some of them are brand new. You got these weird cloud levels, the skyscraper one, this construction site. I'm honestly shocked at how much effort was put into this game. Even the galleon ship from DKC2 makes a brief appearance. With that said, however, the levels don't stand out very well. The culprit behind that is just the lack of colors, and the music tone is always the same. Because every level is colored the same, they all start to blend with each other by the end. As for the new level themes, well, they're hit and misses. One of the ones I didn't really care for was the cloud levels. It was hard to tell where you could land sometimes, and these moving platforms were a pain in the butt. They move on their own and bounce off these grids, but you can also change the direction of the platforms by jumping on them. This leads you to being forced to do really precise jumps to move the platform to the correct direction. But the skyscraper levels were great. I especially love the one where you have to collect the Kong letters to make your own platforms. That's honestly a really fun idea that worked well. And for some reason, the hitboxes are very generous. Like, I kid you not, there were so many times where I'd be like a foot away from an enemy, and it would count as a hit. So while a bit janky, it made platforming a little bit easier, which is nice because the screen crunch is pretty tight. Although frankly, that's about the last positive I've got for Donkey Kong Land. The controls are okay and have this bit of floatiness to them. This made some jumps fairly easy, but you also sink fast when you begin falling, which make the big gaps tough. In fact, the floaty jump created one of the most annoying glitches I've ever seen in a platformer. There's times where you'll jump up really high and the screen moves up with you, but if you get too high up, the screen won't scroll back down and you will die once you reach the bottom of the screen. I have no idea how a glitch like this exists, but it was a problem for a good amount of the levels. The music is also forgettable. It's got a mix of remixes and original compositions, but really, it's just your typical Game Boy chiptunes, so you kind of have to like that style already to appreciate it. As for the bosses, well, they're all original ideas, but are way too easy. But holy crap, the first boss song goes hard. David Wise, Graham Norgate, y'all were cooking with that one. But oh my god, the ending was cracking me up. When you beat K. Rool, you get a blank white screen with some text scrolling up that says, "Congratulations." And then the credits roll. This has to be the best video game ending of all time. It's straight to the point, doesn't f*** around, and blatantly says that the game is over. While I wouldn't recommend playing this unless you're really curious, that ending is just perfect. 22. Donkey Kong Country Game Boy Color. So, funny story, this is the only Donkey Kong game that I owned as a kid. So going back to play it now was strangely nostalgic. Seeing all the menus, the unique title screens, the crunchy sprite work, it was a trip to relive this weird port. It's kind of amazing that this game runs at all. Squishing Donkey Kong Country down to Game Boy Color must have been one hell of a task. But they did it, and despite how impressive it is, it's really not worth playing. The controls are a little wonky, and for some reason your character is really heavy. You fall much faster than the original. It's kind of like Mega Man 1 actually. This makes the game way harder than the original, but that's not all. The collision is somehow even worse. There are so many times where I'd jump or get damaged by an enemy that I clearly hit, or I'd fall through a gap that I shouldn't have. And I haven't brought up the screen crunch. It's very hard to see what's coming. And the music isn't going to be as good either, but for Game Boy Color standards, it gets the job done. There were a few noticeable differences though. Some of the levels have been altered and one was even added. And the game also saves after each level. That's a big improvement over the original. In fact, Candy has you doing these challenges instead of just saving. The loading is also really fast. You'll get in and out of levels in just a couple seconds. And what the heck, I might as well bring up the two bonus minigames. Funky's Fishing is this fishing game where you grab fish to get points, and it's the easiest minigame of all time and you basically can't lose, but I always found it to be kinda novel. Crosshair Cranky has you shooting at crumblings at quick succession. This one is also fine, but it's not really that exciting. So there's really no reason to play Donkey Kong Country on the Game Boy Color unless you're morbidly curious. 21. Donkey Kong Land 2. I'm surprised that I'm putting this above the Game Boy Color version, but that's because the movement and physics are vastly improved. Moving around finally feels right, but the main fix is that the jumps are a bit more floaty and you don't fall as fast. Interestingly, Donkey Kong Land 2 does not take as much of a departure as Donkey Kong Land 1 does. This is very close to the DKC2 original in a lot of ways. The overworlds are similar looking, the music remixes are the same, the level gimmicks are all the same, and a couple of the side Kong characters return. The main difference here is the level design. All of that is, of course, unique. You play as Diddy and Dixie Kong, which is really nice because I've always liked Dixie's hair twirling move. It makes navigating big jumps a lot easier, which is really helpful with a game that has this much screen crunch. Even when you get hit, the game switches you to the next Kong way faster as well. And plus, you can see if you have an extra Kong or an extra hit point for your animal buddy at all times. There's a convenient little icon. It's honestly kind of crazy how much DKL2 improved over DKL1. And it doesn't have that awkward jumping glitch either, thank God for that. The only thing I wish it included was the Kongs dancing at the end of the levels. I was kind of missing that, I'm not gonna lie. And the bosses have been simplified a lot too. This isn't that surprising, of course, but they were stupid easy to beat compared to the SNES game. I don't know if I'd really say that Donkey Kong Land 2 is worth playing because the screen crunch is still an issue, but I have to applaud it for all the improvements that were made. 20. Donkey Kong Land 3. Why did they change from a number to Roman numerals? It's a mystery greater than life itself. Strangely enough, the Game Boy version was never released in Japan because they got a Game Boy Color version instead. It's titled Donkey Kong GB, Dinky Kong, and Dixie Kong. Ah yes, my favorite Kong member, Dinky Kong! So this game is kind of a demake of DKC3. You play as Dixie and Kiddy Kong and they control as you'd expect. All the improvements that DKL2 had carry over to DKL3, although there's no boat riding in the overworld. In fact, the overworld looks way different. It's very linear like the other Donkey Kong Land titles. And there's a couple other things worth mentioning. If you complete the game, you'll unlock Time Attack, which is honestly really cool. I wouldn't have thought a feature from the GBA remakes would make it to the Game Boy. Ellie also shoots water on command without having to suck any up, and Kiddy Kong gives me the funniest eyebrow raise when he finishes levels. Everything okay, buddy? The levels have a really good flow to them, which is why I'm ranking it as the highest in the trilogy. I really enjoyed going through these levels. Very rarely would I get hit because some enemy pops up at the last second. The levels were simply designed at a higher quality. Although I do have to point out that these things that shoot the nuts in the tree levels, they blended in way too much. Like, seriously, who's gonna notice this the first time playing? But overall, the Donkey Kong Land trilogy is novel and an interesting part of history. But honestly, they're just basic platformers that haven't aged very well. I wouldn't call DKL1 a great game to revisit, but DKL2 and 3, they're alright. I guess they'd be worth trying. 19. Donkey Kong Jungle Beat. So, fun fact, this was the first game to get the E10 Plus rating. That is hilarious because it's just Donkey Kong. How graphic can it be? Well, it's a platformer where you move using the DK bongos. I was extremely hesitant to try this at first, and boy was it weird. You move by tapping the bongos left and right, jump by hitting both bongos, and do an attack by clapping. That's it, the controls are really as basic as that. The goal is to unlock these crests by getting bananas in the level, as these unlock all the kingdoms which contain said levels. The bananas also serve as a life bar, and getting hit by an enemy or boss will decrease your banana count. So I guess it's kind of the same idea as Sonic losing rings, except you'll never lose all your bananas at once. The first half of the game was a goddamn fever dream. It feels strange smashing your hands on bongos to move because it halfway feels unnatural and it halfway feels amazing when you're like smacking enemies around from the feedback of your hands. And then you've got the bosses. There's a new one after each kingdom, but they don't change until the very end. It's the same 4 repeated over and over, but they get slightly harder each time. One of these is a Kong where you have to time your punches and dodges swings to win, so it's basically Punch-Out! Then you got these sections where you ride a buffalo, and this is really damn satisfying too. You're building speed by mashing the bongos to get as high of a jump as possible, and it just feels satisfying. The end of the stage is great too. You can smash the ever-loving shit out of the bongos for some extra bananas, and I can't believe how nicely animated DK is for this segment. In fact, the whole game looks really nice. There's a bunch of interesting locales too. But then we get to the second half of the game. The levels start to get more intricate, and the bosses and enemies start moving around more erratically. Normally, this is how a game should function. You want it to get harder as you're going along and getting better. However, that doesn't translate very well with the bongo controller. Some of the levels require really precise movement, and it's extremely hard to judge how fast DK is going to move, or how much reach his jump will get. Joysticks have the same reach when using them, and you can build muscle memory much more easily because the motions are always the same. But with this game, I'm just smacking bongos with my entire hand, which makes it much more challenging to judge and finesse how DK will move on screen. Because of this, the levels at the end were extremely frustrating and kind of killed what made Jungle Beat so fun to begin with. I still think this is a really creative and solid game overall, but the last handful of levels should have been toned down a bit more. Of course, you could just say skill issue, but come on, look at what I'm working with here. 18. Diddy Kong Racing DS. If you ever wanted to play Diddy Kong Racing, but everything about it is worse or slightly mediocre, then this is the game for you. While it's great to see Diddy Kong Racing get a remake at all, the DS was not a good pick to do so. This is largely the same as the N64 Classic, but it also has a lot of differences, and I don't really like any of them. For starters, Banjo and Conker were removed because of the Rare acquisition, and in their place are Dixie and Tiny Kong. While I don't like that they had to do that, I understand completely, and these are okay picks for what it's worth. At least you can play as Wizpig and Taj now, that's a fun little bonus. There's some new tracks to play on too, but they're just okay. They aren't all that memorable because they don't have any sort of distinct theme, they just kind of exist. You can also design your own tracks, which is an amazing idea and concept, but it's so bare bones that it's not worth the trouble at all. All you do here is draw a path with your stylus, and that's it. Yep, that is it. You have no control of where the items go, what they are, or what even the elevation looks like. You can't even pick a theme. It all takes place in this strange cloudy area. But all of this isn't really the meat and butter of the problem. The physics and controls feel completely different. Everything is stiffer and heavier feeling. And not only that, but every track has been brought back, and they've all been altered to be way more flat and straightforward. The natural bumpiness from the original is almost entirely gone outside of a few exceptions. And I think that's because airtime in the car feels janky now. You kinda get locked into place while in the air until you land again. So instead of tweaking the movement to fix that, the tracks are instead way more dull to play as a result. And then there's the map screen. What the heck happened? It serves its purpose somewhat, but the orientation is not the same as what's displayed on screen, so it's not very helpful at all. Mario Kart DS achieved this perfectly by keeping the orientation of the map the same as the perspective of the player, so I'm not sure why it's like this. And dude, you use the touchscreen or microphone to get the starting boost. That is so dumb. This comes off as a blatant example of developers feeling pressured to use the touchscreen gimmicks that just aren't necessary. The silver coin challenges aren't included either. It's been replaced with this touch balloon challenge. Again, I really like the idea of this, but the execution just doesn't work. You have to tap a bunch of balloons while moving automatically, but you also move the camera by dragging the touchscreen. This means that you'll be frantically moving the stylus all over the place and missing balloons because you were forced to move the screen. Why not map the camera control to the D-pad or something? And the hovercraft is not great either. It's harder to control now and way more slippery than before. With the original game, the challenge with controlling the hovercraft is continuously turning without losing speed. You had to find this sense of flow by not turning too sharp, which made it really fun to master. Diddy Kong Racing DS is nothing like that. The hovercraft just slides you across the ground the entire time. I don't even like the music. It's still great tunes, but the quality has been downgraded because this is on a DS. Now, look, I know I just spent a lot of time criticizing this game, but that's because I love the original so much. This version is still functional and playable, but there's not many redeeming factors outside of the fact that it was a portable version for its time. 17. DK King of Swing. Another day, another DK game with gimmicky control schemes. Although this time, it's one of the better ideas. The main premise is to clear levels by pushing the R and L button to swing around. You can also hold the L and R button to do a little jump, and this also attacks enemies and breaks boxes. It's a fairly simple idea, and I was enjoying it for a while. The bananas are also used for health, and if you get 10, then you can refill one of your hearts. Or you can use the bananas for temporary invincibility. So you've got a little bit of a trade-off mechanic. And you know what? It's oddly satisfying swinging yourself around. The momentum actually works fairly well. DK will always spin if he's grabbing one peg, which means you can time when to use jumps to get the most height or distance. You can also use the D-pad for running on the ground, and even adjusting your air movement a bit. But of course, like every other gimmicky DK game, King of Swing falls apart near the end. Once you get to the ice world, that's when it goes to shit. The levels start to get more and more annoying, especially with the ice blocks. Dear God, who thought it was a good idea to add ice blocks into a game like this? See, this is the problem with designing an entire game around one gimmick. There's nothing wrong necessarily with trying out new control schemes like this, obviously, but when you limit the basic controls this much, it's naturally going to make the later levels difficult not because of the level itself, but because of the controls. And honestly, the swinging gets old after a while. There are some interesting ideas in here, like pulling on a lever or throwing rocks at enemies, but you're mostly just swinging around. And that makes every level look the same since you have to use the pegs to climb up. I will give some credit to the bosses though. There's a couple of really good ones in here. My favorite was Davone's locker. You had to grab his tail and then get close enough to spikes and let DK spin to nail a bunch of hits at once. It was really satisfying. And then there's another mode on top of that, Single Jungle Jam. Here, you can play as a bunch of different characters. Even Bubbles makes an appearance, which is really neat. This Jungle Jam has a few different modes, like racing to the top, battling, trying to break barrels, and so on. King of Swing is a decent enough title, but nothing more than a neat little novelty. 16. Donkey Kong 64. I've literally wanted to play this since I was like 8 years old. I remember as a kid, I was at a friend's house eating Pringles for the first time, and I watched my friend play Donkey Kong 64 for about 30 minutes. It was mystifying at the time. It looked so interesting, but I never had a chance to try it. And here we are now, and the game opens with the DK rap. It's one of the best and corniest rap songs of all time. It's even in the Mario movie, for crying out loud. I've also always loved this in-your-face menu with DK throwing the barrels at you. That's something I really miss about this era of games. The menus weren't afraid to be fun and exciting, while still maintaining a good sense of direction. So DK64 is a 3D platformer where you play as 5 different Kongs, which initially sounds pretty awesome. Although it's really strange you can't play as Dixie or Kiddy Kong. What was wrong with including them? Instead, we've got Tiny and Chunky Kong. Which, I mean, they're fine too, but I just don't get why we needed new Kongs. I was really curious how the controls were gonna feel, as they tend to be a bit janky for early 3D titles. But you know what? I thought they worked well. Every character moves pretty fluidly for the most part, and they all have their own distinct movement. Vine swinging is also pretty easy since it just requires proper timing with the A button, which I think is the best choice in this 3D space. I do have to admit that the movement itself feels pretty slow. It's the same issue that Banjo-Kazooie has. I wanna like that game more, but actually exploring the areas takes forever to do and gets really tedious. The camera is also a pain in the ass, as it often lags behind you and doesn't work very well in general. But we'll get to the bad parts later. I was cracking up using Donkey Kong because he moans every time he rolls. Like, I can't tell if he's in pain or pleasure. Cranky Kong returns as well and gives you new moves throughout the game. These new moves can change the characters a lot, like Diddy Kong gets an entire rocket barrel where you fly around the level. Then you got Funky Kong, who turns the monkeys into true Americans and gives every character a unique kind of gun. Candy Kong is back too and gives every Kong an instrument, which can be used a few different ways in game, but did they really need to give her the biggest knockers of all time? I mean, Jesus Christ, is this not a little excessive? But whatever. Some of these worlds are pretty neat even to this day. My favorite is still the main hub, DK Island. The song that plays is so peaceful, it makes me feel all warm inside. I've always loved how relaxing it is. The music is pretty solid throughout the entire game, but that's not much of a surprise. This is Donkey Kong. So at this point, I've pretty much talked about all the positives because oh goody oh boy. This has to be the most drawn out and padded 3D platformer that I've ever played in my life. Now, as you'd expect with any 3D platformer, the main objective is to collect things to make progress, and you'll do this by finding bananas, specifically colored bananas that are catered to the character you're playing as. You also need to get golden bananas, and these are typically found by completing specific challenges. There's also Banana Bunch coins, which is the currency to upgrade your moves, and banana medals are collected after getting 75 bananas in a level. These aren't as important, as they just unlock Jetpack, which is an old rare game, but it's still something you can get. The main problem with all this is that every character has their own unique bananas and banana coins to collect. So Diddy can only get red, Linky blue, Tiny purple, and so on. The reason this sucks so much is because you can only swap characters in these tag barrels, and there's not that many in each level. So what this means is you're basically forced to play every level 5 times over. And not just that, but you gotta talk to Cranky, Candy, and Funky Kong all those times as well to get your upgrades for each character to make progress. Now, I knew all of this going into the game as it's a well-known criticism, but I didn't think I would mind that much. I enjoy a lot of different 3D platformers, so I figured that bias would carry over to some extent. But oh boy, Donkey Kong 64 is a beast that sits on its own scale. It is so much more tedious than I could have imagined. Because the movement is so slow and the game runs at a pretty low frame rate, it's like walking through sand the entire way through. Oh my god, the game never seems to end. You will spend hours and hours retreading your steps in the same level, and it's so boring. Now, there are banana ports which allow you to warp around levels, and this helps a little bit for sure, but I'm not that familiar with this game, so I don't remember where half of these warp points are to begin with. DK64 could have been such a better game if it had two minor changes. One, allow us to change Kongs on the fly, and two, give us a map when pausing the game and let us warp to the warp points that way. Seriously, these two changes would have made Donkey Kong 64 100 times better. But of course, that's not how the game works. Because of that, I really don't have any desire to revisit this game in the future. It's really not worth replaying at all. There is a mod out there where you can swap the Kongs whenever you want, so I guess you could try that instead. And there's a few other things to bring up. The bosses are not all that great. They're pretty damn easy, and King K. Rool in particular takes freaking forever to get through. Rambi and Enguarde return as animal buddies, which is cool, but where the heck are the other ones? So many of these enemies were brought over from the country games, but not the animal buddies for some reason. I will give some props to the multiplayer though. The multiplayer is still a lot of fun, and works because every character has a weapon in the main game already. I've played this a few times with friends, and it was always a great time. But yeah, I really wanted to like DK64 more. It's just one of those games that really needs a remake that rehauls how swapping characters work. Or honestly, just screw it, let's get a new 3D DK already. What's taking so long? 15. DK Jungle Climber. Out of all the gimmicky DK games, this one is actually pretty decent. I wasn't expecting to say that after playing through King of Swing, but they fixed a lot of the issues that game had. Like before, you still use R and L to swing around on the pegs. A lot of the same elements like the lever and fast spinning pegs are included too, but the controls have been heavily updated. For one, you can hold the R and L button while in the air and automatically lock onto pegs. As far as I could tell, that wasn't possible in King of Swing, and this makes grabbing pegs much easier. But the biggest upgrade by far is the jumping. You no longer have to hold R and L to jump. You just push the A button, and it can be done off the ground or off a peg. This completely changes how the game feels. While there's still an element of challenge when it comes to aiming for pegs, just the fact that I can push the A button to jump is a huge relief. Another thing I noticed too is when you collide with a wall, you don't get tossed backwards and drop the peg you were holding. This made the later levels actually manageable, and the overall movement speed seems to be faster as well. The momentum functions better when you're in the air too. Like, I don't think I can iterate enough how much the controls have improved. I was initially dreading the idea of playing Jungle Climber, but ended up enjoying it almost the whole way through. But I'm still not done with gameplay changes, because now you can use Diddy Kong. He can be utilized as an extra hit point, attacking enemies from far away and using special items. The hammer and torch specifically break through tough platforms, and it's a nice way to freshen up the levels. Speaking of getting hit though, you may have noticed the lack of a health bar. Well, that's because you don't have one. It's been replaced with a life system, which is pretty lame if you ask me. But this is easily remedied because you can unlock a cheat to come back from a game over with 20 lives instead of 5, so it's not really an issue. There's actually a lot of new collectibles too. You've got the big DK coins, which unlock cheats, banana coins unlock extra levels, Kong panels for lives, and we've also got gems. Getting 100 of these nets you a crystal star, which gives you temporary invincibility and the option to fly wherever you want. Dude, what a huge upgrade in abilities! Pretty much everything has been significantly enhanced. Even the music goes pretty hard. I was digging the title screen tune as well as many of the others. And just look at this world map. You move through it so fluidly, and it's in this cool 3D perspective. Massive props to whoever put that together. I will admit that the sprites aren't quite as charming as the GBA version, but they still look pretty good. There's a bit more of a story too, although it essentially boils down to K. Rool stealing some crystal banana or whatever, and you have to get it back. The reason I bring this up though is because you meet this guy called Zananab. It's a talking banana that takes us through wormholes. Need I say more? Man, there are so many neat little things in Jungle Climber, like this level on Ghost Island. Diddy holds a map that's shown on the bottom screen, and you have to find your way around by looking at it and keeping track of DK's location. The bosses were fantastic as well. They even brought back the dragon dude that I liked from the GBA title. Now, of course, no game is perfect, and I wasn't a fan of the last few levels. First off, they brought back those stupid ice blocks, but at least the level design was a bit more forgiving, so I'll give it that. But my main gripe is with a level called Toy Box 3. You're forced to take this huge-ass ball to a pin to pop it, which, sounds easy enough. However, there's times where you have to continuously aim and launch this ball high into the air while also being surrounded by walls that change the ball's direction constantly. So what happens is you hit the ball one direction, and 2 seconds later, it's getting pushed back another way, and it feels like sheer dumb luck getting the ball to where it needs to go. It was incredibly annoying to say the least. Like with King of Swing, there's some bonus modes to check out, and these are just okay. We've got a challenge mode, which is more mini games, but a lot of these just come from the tutorial level. There's also extra stages, which I gotta be honest, I couldn't beat them. I do not have the skills or patience for them at all, but hey, I was enjoying what might be the jazziest DS music I'd ever heard. But yeah, despite a few hiccups, DK Jungle Climber is pretty solid. It's not as good as the regular platformers, but I can appreciate them trying something a little different and actually making it work well. 14. Donkey Konga. I was not expecting to enjoy Donkey Konga so much, but let's also keep in mind that I love rhythm games. Seriously, I played thousands of hours of Guitar Hero and Rock Band, so a game like this speaks to me on another level. Now, Donkey Konga is basically a precursor to Taiko, a rhythm series found in the arcades where you smack huge drums to hit notes. There's console versions of Taiko too. I've got one of the games on the Switch, but anyway. I learned that Reggie apparently hated this game and thought it would hurt the DK brand. While I do agree with him to an extent, I love just imagining Reggie coming into the office one day, hearing about the game, and just fuming over a monkey hitting bongos. The image just sounds hilarious. And speaking of the bongos, that's what I use to play. You can use a regular controller too, but what's the fun in that? The controls are pretty basic. Yellow notes are hitting the left side, red is right side, pink is both, and white is clapping. Yes, there's a microphone built into the bongos so you can actually clap to hit notes. At first, I actually kind of hated it. I wasn't hitting notes and thought that the clapping noise was breaking my score streak. But that wasn't the actual issue. In fact, you can clap whenever you want without consequence. I was simply hitting the notes late, as Donkey Konga requires you to hit notes earlier than I'm used to. So once I adjusted to that, I was having a killer time. It's kind of shocking how accurate the bongos are. I can't believe mine still work as well as they do. The song list is fairly small, but it's got some bangers in here. There's some classical music, some Nintendo stuff like the DK rap and Zelda theme, but lots of pop and rock tunes as well. We Will Rock You, All the Small Things, Rock Lobster, Whip It. There's some pretty iconic picks in here. Granted, a lot of these songs are covers because I imagine buying the license from Blink-182 or Cream would cost them an arm and leg, but they're still pretty fun to have regardless. You can even change how your bongo sounds, whether you want crappy NES blips or slick electric drums. There's a lot of selection here. I also love how Ellie and Diddy Kong are just jamming at the bottom the whole time. Taiko games are so sick, man. Outside of the core game, however, there's really not much else to talk about. There are a few other modes and unlockables, but that's where Donkey Konga is lacking. There's a challenge mode, which is essentially playing the same music in a random playlist. Jam Session is the same as the regular mode, but now you can see the accuracy of your hits in real time, so I wouldn't really call it a unique mode. DK Town is where you can buy stuff like new drum sound effects, mini games, and even expert songs. Yes, the hard mode has to be purchased song by song through in-game coins. That is incredibly stupid. Why do I have to unlock a difficulty mode in a rhythm game? And also, the cost of this stuff is insanely expensive. Unlocking everything is going to take a lot of grinding. I also found my hands getting a little sore from all the smacking, but that's probably because I'm not used to it and played over 3 hours in one sitting. As for the minigames, well, they're just okay. Bash K Rule is just whack-a-mole, and 100M Vine Climb is climbing up a vine and collecting fruit. Banana Juggle was a fun idea though. You have to juggle bananas and get as high of a score as possible before time runs out. The trick, however, is that clapping adds a banana to your juggle, so you have to pre-plan when to add bananas and try your best to avoid dropping any. So is this a much shorter and less dense game than DK64? Absolutely, but I'd much rather replay this than a huge convoluted 3D platformer that doesn't respect your time. 13. Donkey Konga 2. This barely edges over the first game, and that's because I enjoyed the song selection a little more. Donkey Konga 2 is pretty much the same game otherwise. You're still hitting notes with the bongos and all that jazz. I found the songs to be a little more mellow compared to the first game, and I was really jiving with them. Plus, this one has a cover of All Star, so you can't really go wrong there. The UI has also been updated, and I like it a lot more than the first title. It's much easier to find things now, and is better organized overall. You can also keep track of your high score after every song, although strangely, you have to use a picture instead of writing out your name? I mean, I suppose it'd take a while to type out initials with the bongos, but that's weird how the only option to save your score is with a photo. As for the other modes and unlockables, well, it's a little different, but hasn't really been improved. We get 2 new minigames, and you don't have to buy them from the shop this time. Instead, you have to spend coins to play the minigames, which is honestly kind of worse if you ask me, because all the unlockables are expensive as hell yet again. But for the minigames, we'll start with Barrel Race, and I gotta say, it's pretty eh. All you do is hit notes in quick succession before the other person. Fascinating. Then there's Keep the Rhythm, and it's just hitting notes again, except they go invisible after a while. The minigames are even less inspired than before. It's not that they're adding much value to begin with, but it's just bizarre to see them included since they hardly stand out as their own thing. The challenge mode also returns and is unchanged, but now you can have a set number of songs to play. While that's nice and all, why isn't there an option to select however many I want, or even just a time limit? Would it have been that hard to implement? Beyond that though, we've got 2 brand new modes, and they aren't much to write home about. Freestyle Zone has you hitting the bongos at random to make your own beat, and each time you hit something, a PNG of a Donkey Kong character pops up. Wow. I mean, I guess this would have been kinda neat if we could use actual drums, but these bongo controllers aren't sensitive enough to create proper beats at all. Then finally, we have Concert. It's a co-op mode where one person claps and the other person hits the drums. Couldn't you just do this with the main game with any song? Like, what makes this so different? You could really tell that they tried to expand on the first title, and I can at least applaud the attempt here, but man, the side content just kind of exists. While I don't think the extra modes have any real value, the core gameplay is still great, and that's what really matters at the end of the day. 12. New play control, Donkey Kong Jungle Beat. I have to admit, I'm kind of shocked at how much better this version of Jungle Beat is. The main addition is that you can now use a joystick to move and the A button to jump. Thank freaking God they've made that change. It makes the entire game so much more playable. While I absolutely adored using the bongos, now I actually feel like I'm in control. But that's not the only gameplay change. The sound wave attack that you do by shaking the remote is no longer a radius. It's now directional, which means you have to aim more accurately when stunning enemies with it. And I am completely on board with this change simply because it's much easier to move around the levels. It makes sense. The way the bananas work is a little bit different too. They're still required to unlock the crest, but they don't pair with your health. Instead, you get 3 hearts for each stage, and a life bar for the bosses. While it's not as interesting as the GameCube version, once again, it's a smart change. It was pretty unfair to fight a new boss in the original, only to lose a ton of bananas because you didn't understand the patterns yet. They also added what's basically a boss rush and a new level. The new level isn't anything crazy, it's just a celebration for beating the game, and it's filled to the brim with bananas. So, needless to say, this version is vastly superior to the original. There's really no reason to play the GameCube one, unless you really want to experience the novelty of the bongos. 11. Donkey Kong Country. I think this is maybe the 3rd or 4th time I've played through this game, and each time I play it, I enjoy it a little bit more. It's of course the superior version compared to the Game Boy Color. The graphics still look really great and are impressive for the time period. That's something I've always liked about this franchise. It's always tried to push the limits on visuals, and Donkey Kong Country far succeeds with that. The animal buddies are a lot of fun to use too, with Rambi and Espresso being my favorites. There's nothing better than hopping onto one of them and absolutely plowing through a stage. It's super exhilarating. In all the levels, you can find 4 letters that spell out Kong. All they do is give you an extra life, which is kind of neat I suppose, but there's also a code that gives you 50 lives right at the beginning, making that kind of pointless. They're still fun to collect though, since they tend to be put in tougher hidden areas. There's also golden animal collectibles, and getting 3 of these takes you to a bonus level for more lives. Again, it's already easy to get lives, but it still feels special to reach a bonus room and go crazy with one of the animals. And there's a surprising amount of level variety too. You got your classic jungle levels shooting from barrel to barrel, the scary minecart ones, the slippery ass snow areas, the caves that have on and off switches, and plenty more. These level themes do repeat themselves, but they're really smart about it in making repeating themes distinct. Going back to the minecarts, the first one has you jumping from rail to rail. The second one is the same idea, but you physically jump out of the minecart instead and have to land back in. Then there's the on and off switches. One level disables enemies while another activates the lights. In between each level, there's a few other things you can do. You can talk to Cranky, who honestly has nothing important to say, but he's chill. Then Funky Kong lets you fly around to other areas, and Candy is for saving. The saving system is pretty archaic in design, admittedly. I mean, we should be able to simply save after beating a level, but since lives are easy to get, it's not much of a problem. And man, the music is amazing too. I love that it goes for an atmospheric tone, and it works beautifully. Whether it's Aquatic Ambience's soothing sweep, or DK Island Swing hyping you up, or Minecart Madness giving off a frantic and dark tone. Even the game over screen is charming. It looks like DK and Diddy just left a pub and lost a bar fight. But with all that said, this is not a perfect game. I honestly used to not like Donkey Kong Country, and it's still not a favorite of mine. Once I finished it yet again and really thought about why I felt this way, I realized it comes down to 3 issues, one of the small ones being the bosses. While there's a lot of cool designs here, they're all really easy and repeat themselves. Although I can appreciate King K. Rool's fake out credits, and the Gangplank Galleon music absolutely bangs. The 2 real problems come down to the camera and hitboxes. We'll start with the camera, because it infuriates me sometimes. This is not completely the game's fault, because the SNES could only offer a 4:3 screen ratio, but the freaking camera lags behind you fairly often, meaning it's really easy to get hit by enemies just because there's no time to see them coming. This in particular is what made me realize why I've never had much desire to revisit the SNES DK games. The camera can be really frustrating. It was almost like I had to memorize the harder levels just to get through them, and I wasn't jiving with that. And then finally, the hitboxes can be really wonky. Sometimes I'll jump on an enemy and take it out, and sometimes I'll get hit. Even if I'm jumping at the same angle and spot, there's always a chance I get hit for no reason. Now, I don't know if anybody else shares these thoughts with me. I feel like the answer is gonna be no as usual. I'm not trying to be contrarian, I swear, but it feels nice to finally comprehend why I've always preferred Mario over DK. But I've definitely grown to appreciate this trilogy a lot more. It's an iconic classic that will likely stand the test of time. 10. Donkey Kong Country Game Boy Advance. Yep, I actually prefer the Game Boy Advance ports. The main reason is because the screen is zoomed out, which makes it easier to see what's coming. Just look at this side to side, it's a pretty big difference. This was my #1 issue with the original game, and now it's mostly solved. The only problem at this point is the vertical scaling hasn't been adjusted, so climbing up and down levels still feel the same as the SNES versions. But regardless, that only arises for a small amount of levels. For the most part, the GBA version makes it easier to react to what's coming up while still retaining the same feel and difficulty. There's actually a lot of small changes worth talking about, like the fact that they added in an intro cutscene which is based off the story in the manual. That's really cool. The enemies all have unique voice clips, and there's more sound effects in general. And like a lot of GBA ports, Donkey and Diddy Kong have voice lines now, which is very akin to the Mario Advance games. The music isn't quite as good, obviously, but it still works and sounds similar enough. And look at that overworld map. Holy crap, it almost looks like a damn painting now, and it has moving parts like the waves in the water. The minigames return from the Game Boy Color version, or well, I guess the fishing's back at least. Funky's Fishing has a really chill tune, and there's actual goals now instead of just catching fish. Candy also has a minigame called Candy's Dance Studio. It's a basic rhythm game where you tap the shown button to the beat, but then we've got the bosses. They even improved some of these. Like the oil drum boss has to be hit by TNT instead of just nothing. Really Naughty also drops stalactites, and a couple others have been tweaked for the better. There's even a DK attack mode, which basically is just time attack. You run through a level as fast as possible while collecting extra time to increase your rank, and it's solid. The main downside here is the sprite work. It's not as detailed as the original, of course, but I think they did the best they could. The main problem is the brightness. You may have noticed just how bright all the levels are. That's because this was released at a time before the GBA SP was released. Since there was no backlight, a lot of GBA games made their pixels extra bright so they'd be easier to see. While it's a nice gesture, it does ruin the vibe of the darker levels that take place in caves. I could see that bothering some people, but I don't mind that much. Just the fact that we have more screen space makes this so much better. 9. Donkey Kong Country 2 Diddy Kong's Quest. This was my first time fully beating the DKC sequel, and I was pleasantly surprised. I don't think it fixed my core issues from the first game, but it made quite a few improvements, the biggest one being the bosses. Not only are they a lot more dynamic and interesting, but they were a lot tougher. The boss patterns required some practice to get the hang of, which made them a lot more enjoyable than Country 1's fights. You also don't play as Donkey Kong since he's been trapped by K. Rool, so joining Diddy is Dixie Kong. I really liked using her because she has this hair whip move where she can glide until hitting the ground, and it was helpful in many circumstances. I can't tell you how many times I would switch to Dixie just to clear some huge gap or more easily avoid enemies. And props to Rare as well for having the balls to do this to begin with. They could have easily just given us Donkey and Diddy Kong again and no one would have complained. Dixie and Diddy as a team are simply more enjoyable to use in general. And speaking of teaming up, now you can use team-up moves which get you a little bit of extra height. These are usually used to access bonus areas, which are much more important in Diddy Kong's quest. See, the level design is a bit more open with multiple paths, and that's because you want to hunt down the bonus levels to get DK coins and Creme coins. Finding enough Creme coins can be used to unlock new levels in the Lost World, so there's a good reason to hunt these things down. I also love the winning animations that Diddy and Dixie Kong have after clearing a level. You can just tell the developers are having a blast making this game. There's a couple new characters too. First, we got Wrinkly Kong. You use banana coins to pay for lessons about levels if you want, and look at her chalkboard. The equations are completely wrong. This is also how you save the game, which you can do for free one time, but then you have to pay to save. This is, well, I mean, obviously it's dumb, but again, there's a 50 lives code that anyone can use without trouble, so the save system barely matters. Swinky Kong is another new one, and he hosts a quiz show. If we get the questions right, we get a reward, and it's pretty silly. As for the level themes, well, they're just as creative as ever. A lot of them are based around pirates, which is really cool, while other themes from DKC1 return. The water levels all manage to have their own unique spin to them, and same with the minecart stages. My favorite was probably the timer one. You have to hit barrels with green pluses to add time and avoid the red minus ones. It was intense and scary, which made it all the more satisfying to clear. The standout level is Bramble Blast. You can tell the developers really put their all into this one. The music is incredibly soothing, and the environment is beyond dreamy. You're surrounded by vines that have filled up the sky. And while I love the vibe, it gets old fairly quickly considering all we're doing is shooting through barrels the whole time. But man, that music is just fantastic. It might be my favorite Donkey Kong song of all time. I also have to comment on the overworld, because I found navigation to be confusing. And that's mostly because the icons would often blend into the background, making it awkward to figure out where to go. Now, yes, I know there's arrows, but oftentimes you don't really go the direction of the arrows. Parts of the overworld were just a strange oddity. So with that said, I would say DKC2 has an edge over the first game. I still don't like the camera, and I found the hitboxes to be very inconsistent yet again. So not much has changed there, but it's still well worthy of playing. 8. Donkey Kong Country 2 Game Boy Advance. Like the other GBA remake, DKC2 is very similar in terms of its advantages. The screen is zoomed out more, the save system is more forgiving, hitboxes are a little more generous, it's better in almost every way. And like with the DKC1 remake, this one has also added an intro cutscene. And yet again, it's based on the story in the manual, which is pretty awesome. The overworld has also been recreated, and it looks a lot nicer than before and is easier to follow. It's interesting how zoomed in it's gotten, but I still like it a lot more now. There's also an entire new boss named Kirozine. He's this big red dinosaur dude with swords and breathes fire. I find it amusing how only his head and arms move, and his body doesn't react to anything else. There's also a few new mini-games, and these are hit and miss. Espresso's Racing has you racing as the ostrich himself, and you run across speed panels to win. It's decent fun. Then there's Funky Flights. You fly around in a gyrocopter while completing a variety of challenges. I don't mind this one either. There's a good amount of variety for your tasks as well. Vagabug, however, is kinda stupid. You try to collect these fireflies while a Clubba walks around, and he smashes you if you get too close. It's pretty annoying having to wait for Clubba to pass by, and it seems like the fireflies never show up when you want them to. Outside of that though, I don't have much else to say that hasn't already been said. If you didn't like the camera and the SNES version of DKC like myself, then these GBA versions are absolutely worth trying out. 7. Donkey Kong Country 3 Dixie Kong's Double Trouble. I gotta be honest, I did not expect to put this game as the highest in the trilogy. I mean, just look at Kiddy Kong. Bro carries a pacifier with him at all times. He's literally a toddler, and the only reason we play as him is because Dixie Kong was forced to bring her cousin with. In terms of how he controls, well, he's very similar to Donkey Kong. He moves a bit slower, but they're essentially the same character. As for the actual game, it's more of what you'd expect, but I found every good aspect of this trilogy has been perfected in DKC3. To start, the levels mostly follow the structure of DKC2. You'll find hidden barrels to go to bonus rooms, which is where you get the coins to unlock the extra levels. But on top of that, there's a few levels that are meant to be played fast, which is similar to DKC1. I really like that the third game has both level styles included, which I see as a win-win. The overworld is way better now too, especially compared to the second game where it was really confusing and convoluted. That's been completely remedied in DKC 3. Not only do the maps look great and are easy to follow, but you even use a boat and travel from island to island. And on top of that, beating bosses unlocks parts to upgrade your boat and lets you explore islands that you couldn't before. So yes, this is pretty much Sonic Rush Adventure but without having to grind levels. I can't believe I'm making that comparison. A lot of the same characters return, although Swanky Kong now includes a minigame instead of quizzes. I found this to be a lot more fun, honestly, and the perspective was pretty cool as well. And when you visit Wrinkly Kong, she's playing an N64 and you can hear the castle music from Mario 64. This makes her the most goated grandma, right? The animal buddies are mostly great too, and I really liked using Ellie the elephant. She's not quite as strong as Rambi and is scared of rats for some reason, but she can also suck up barrels and throw them. And she can hold water in her trunk and use it later as an attack. So honestly, a pretty neat inclusion. The only animal buddy I didn't like is Squitter. He may be able to jump off his webs an infinite amount of times, but he feels clunky and is really slow. I don't know why they brought him back from DKC 2. He wasn't that great to use in that game either. The levels themselves though are what really stand out. While there were still moments where the camera and hitboxes were annoying, that seemed to be much less of a problem in DKC 3. The themes are just incredible as well. My favorite was the tree levels where you're climbing these massive trees and hopping from branch to branch. It felt like a perfect evolution to the classic jungle theme. I have to wonder, was Cuphead inspired by this game? Cuphead's got a tree level where you're climbing up in a similar manner. Just something to think about. Then there's this cool water level where a fish is following you the whole time, and to survive, you have to keep luring it towards other fish so it's well fed. If you don't do that, it'll get hungry and start attacking you. Again, Rare has done a fantastic job making levels feel unique and have their own identity. The minecart stages have been replaced by toboggans, which is a nice little change-up. Flying down the snowy hills was a blast, and same with these low-gravity levels. It changes the dynamic completely. The only thing that sucks is that you don't get a cool dance animation after beating a level. Where the heck is Dixie Kong's guitar solo? She just pulls on a rope now and that's it. Dumb. But on to the bosses. These are also really great with a couple of standouts. My favorite was probably Belch's burp. You throw bugs into its mouth, and it burps so powerfully that it gets launched backwards. You have to keep making him burp so he'll launch himself off the stage to win. It's such a silly and fun idea. And then the 3D snowman fight was awesome too. Having to chuck snowballs from close up to long distance, it was great. The only stage I didn't like was Poisonous Pipeline because it reverses your controls. That one was a pain in the ass. But overall, I'm amazed at how much more I like this game compared to the first two. Maybe that's an unpopular opinion, but DKC 3 made me realize why people enjoy this franchise so much. 6. Donkey Kong Country 3 Game Boy Advance. Out of all the GBA versions, this one has the most changes by far. There's an entire new world, a new boss, Croctopus, and a new soundtrack. I've heard some say the soundtrack kind of sucks, but I'm honestly indifferent to it. It's a lot more upbeat compared to the original, and some say that it ruins the tone of some of the levels. While I can understand that to an extent, I still think this new soundtrack is pretty solid. I'm not that concerned about it, simply because, like the other GBA remakes, the screen is more zoomed out, which makes gameplay a lot better. An intro cutscene was added in here as well, and the overworld map is once again updated. What's most surprising is the fact that there's an entire new world to play, and it has 6 levels instead of the usual 5, so they really went all out here. These new levels are about the same quality as the others in DKC 3. There aren't any new themes, but it's still nice to have some extra content regardless. The minigames are brand new, and these are my favorite out of all the bonus games from the GBA remakes. First, we've got Cranky's Dojo. You have to block off bristles as they fly towards Cranky. It's simple fun, and I think it was enjoyable and neat to actually control Cranky for once. Then there's Swanky's Dash. It's this cool looking 3D runner that reminds me of the Knuckles Chaotix special stages. This one's just alright though. It's a little hard to get the stars since you can't turn very fast, but not bad. And finally, Funky Kong gives you control of a boat and you'll complete a variety of missions. Controlling the boat here feels great to do, and at the end of the day, I'm glad that this much extra effort was even added in. As strange as it is to say, this has to be my favorite old school Donkey Kong Country game. Who would have thought I'd be saying that about a remake on the Game Boy Advance? 5. Donkey Kong Country Returns. Every issue that I had with the original SNES trilogy has been completely resolved with Donkey Kong Country Returns. The widescreen makes Donkey Kong so enjoyable to play. I can actually see what's coming instead of being surprised half the time. And this is one hell of a nice looking game. Even on the Wii, it still looks fantastic. The characters are animated expressively and feel fluid, and the environments are lush and full of detail. Every world feels very distinct from one another. It's really refreshing after seeing so much blandness from 2D Mario Mario in this time period. Everyone talks about the cool level where everything is a silhouette, but I honestly think every level looks fantastic. The controls are pretty similar to the SNES games, except for two major changes. For one, your roll is really fast this time. You get a nice speed boost from it. It makes doing long jumps not only more useful, but more satisfying. And two, Diddy Kong isn't exactly playable. You can still use them, but will instead attach to DK and give you a few seconds to glide. While I'd rather have just been able to play as Diddy Kong, I don't mind that they tried something a little different here. You can also grab onto patches of grass and hang off them at any angle. It's kind of like vine grabbing, but a little more handy and flexible. The mechanics are really well put together, and you can also slap the ground to hit plants and find hidden puzzle pieces or bananas. And that soundtrack, it remixes tons of classic DK music and is out of this world catchy. Dude, they brought back the minecart levels, and wow, these go so hard! There's a handful of them to play, and each one gets more and more intense. What makes them so damn cool is the landscape around you interacts with where you're going. Oftentimes, huge chunks of land or bombs will destroy the track right in front of you, and you have to survive while the track is getting demolished. It feels right out of an Indiana Jones movie at times. There's even parts where you're trapped inside some sort of circle, and have to survive inside of it. It genuinely feels like an adventure, and I haven't even brought up the new jetpack levels. You ride a jet barrel and have to avoid obstacles, and I like these too. It took a while to get used to the controls since you have to carefully tap or you'll go shooting up and down, but they're pretty fun levels overall. Even Rambi makes a return, but is shockingly underutilized. I think he might be in 3 levels or something, and he's the only animal buddy. I don't know what it is with modern Donkey Kong. Can we please have more than one animal buddy again? At least Cranky Kong is back. He gives you the option to purchase extra lives and unlock bonus levels with banana coins. Pretty much every aspect from the SNES games are included here. But there's one glaring issue. You are forced to shake the remote to roll, slap the ground, and blow. While this is something that you can get used to, it really feels like every Wii game just had to have motion controls shoved in. The game is still playable, but it would have been so much better if there was an option to only use buttons. While I'm not really a fan of this, it's not bad enough to butcher the game as it's still well worth playing. 4. Donkey Kong Country Returns 3D. This is a bit of an oddity. Seeing Wii games on a 3DS is still kind of bizarre to me. I found this version to be slightly better as it has a decent amount of improvements. The biggest and best one, of course, being that there's no more motion controls. Instead of shaking, you just push X or Y, and that one change makes the game way more enjoyable. But that's not all they did. There's also a new easy mode that adds an extra heart to your health. And honestly, this is one of the few Nintendo games where this is actually warranted. DKC Returns gets hard by the end. Those later levels can be very unforgiving, so having a couple extra hit points helps in the later half of the game. There's also a bunch of new levels to play after beating the final boss. 8 levels were added and are all based on previous worlds. These levels are pretty fun to go through, and it was my first time trying out the Golden Temple stage. And damn, this level is hard as hell. This reminds me of the perfect run from Mario Galaxy 2, or Champions Road from Mario 3D World. Cranky Kong's shop also has a couple new items, and they're slightly cheaper. I also like that you can see your collectibles on the bottom screen at all times. All of this is good and dandy, but if you're watching this video and not listening to it, you can see one problem. DKC Returns 3D runs at 30 frames a second. Now, I'm no frame rate stickler usually, but some games really do benefit from running at 60 frames. Racing titles and platformers are usually more fun at a higher frame rate because the action is more pinpoint and on the fly. But this is on the 3DS, so I can't be that surprised that the frame rate and the graphics had to be sacrificed a bit. But even still, just the fact that you control everything with buttons makes it so much better. 3. Donkey Kong Country Returns HD. I can't believe we're talking about this game yet again, but Nintendo re-released it on the Switch. While the loading times are a touch longer, this is by far the definitive way to play. It's a port of the 3DS version as the extra mode and levels are included, and I don't get why people online have been throwing a fit about it. People keep saying the graphics are bad, and yeah, I guess it doesn't look that much better compared to the originals, but also, this is just a port. It's not a remake or remaster. It's been marketed as a port and shouldn't have any higher expectations than that, so I found this to be a fun-a-ton to play regardless. They also updated DK's idle pose, so he's playing with a Switch now. That's kinda cool. The only gripe I really have with DKC Returns HD isn't an issue with just the game, it's a company-wide problem. The original developers were not credited in the credits. This is really disappointing to see, but this has been a habit in Nintendo games for years. Even Nintendo Music doesn't credit the original artist, which is really unfair and unprofessional. I really hope that this is resolved eventually, but I can't really judge a game based on what's missing from the credits. This is still worth playing if you enjoy DK games at all. It's one of the best out there. 2. Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze. Imagine DKC Returns, but way better in every way. Now, I am combining the Wii U version with the Switch one since there's not enough differences between the two, but wow. It is genuinely amazing how incredible Tropical Freeze is. It's one of the best 2D platformers that I've ever played. The structure is pretty much the same as Returns, but has been updated in a lot of ways. First off, the worlds are amazing. Each level feels so full of life and properly realized. Just look at Returns and Tropical Freeze side by side. You can immediately tell how much more polished the second game is. You can also add Dixie and Cranky Kong as partners, which is awesome, but they're still not playable, technically. Each character has unique moves. Diddy still has his little glide, Dixie has this hair twirl that gives you a boost of height, and Cranky can bounce off anything with his cane. While all the characters are helpful, I'm mostly stuck with Dixie since that little extra height boost made avoiding enemies and clearing big jumps a lot easier. The most broken character, however, is the man, the myth, the legend, Funky Kong. He literally has every ability from all the Kongs, and it's hilarious to watch him fly around on his surfboard. Despite using the same art style, the visuals have had a dramatic improvement as you can clearly see more details like DK's fur blowing through the wind in cutscenes. In terms of the normal movement, the only difference is you no longer have that blow attack, which I'm honestly okay with as it slowed things down. Instead, you have a screen nuke when you're with a partner. I didn't really use it, but it's still a nice addition. I also noticed that DK's slapping seems to sound more like a bongo now. Maybe it was like that in Returns as well, but it was really accentuated in this game. Speaking of sound though, the music is simply incredible. It includes some remixes, but also lots of original compositions that weave into each stage perfectly. There's so many different moods captured so seamlessly. The soundtrack really knocked it out of the park. And I haven't even brought up the levels yet. This is the best part. This is one of those rare games where you'll play a level and you get to the end and you'll say to yourself, wow, that was a really cool one. Except that for this game, you're going to say that over and over and over and over again. The level design is so creative and well executed that I almost can't believe it sometimes. 1 minute you're popping a balloon to launch yourself into the air. Next you're launched from a minecart to a piece of wood, only for it to be transformed into a minecart again. You'll jump across massive leaves falling off the trees, to a buzzsaw throwing pieces of rail at your feet, to climbing an icy mountain while it falls apart in front of you. While I really hope that the next DK game is in 3D and manages to expand on Donkey Kong 64 in a better way, I also wouldn't be that upset if it's another 2D title. Despite preferring the controls of a Mario game, this is Donkey Kong platforming at its absolute finest. Even the bosses were a bit better too. All of them have more interesting patterns to learn and were fun to take on. This is a game that I feel like most people don't remember, but goddamn, it sure is a treasure. 1. Diddy Kong Racing. This one is up there for me. And when I say up there, I mean like a top 10 video game of all time. Mario Kart 64 can be a professional dust collector for all I care. Diddy Kong Racing is one of the most heartwarming and feel-good games of all time. While Donkey Kong technically isn't in it, it does have Diddy and a couple other rare characters at the time like Banjo and Conker. This is not an average kart racer either. It is leaps and bounds above that. First off, you can drive in a plane and a hovercraft. Some tracks only allow one of each vehicle, while some have multiple. Not only is it a really innovative concept, but it actually works really well. Switching between all three vehicles keeps things fresh as they all feel different, and the tracks are built around this mechanic. Some areas can only be accessed with the plane or the car as an example, so it adds a lot of replay value. But then there's the adventure mode, which is what really makes this game amazing. You drive around inside a hub world and have to find doors that lead to areas that include the racetracks. Each track requires first place, and there's also a silver coin challenge where you have to find all the coins while still getting first. I also love how the doors to the tracks are massive. It adds this extra sense of importance and significance to what you're doing. Taj is also there in the hub world, letting you unlock the vehicles and just being a really chill elephant. Each track is a blast to play on, and has some of the catchiest and happiest music of all time. If you ever need to cheer yourself up on a bad day, just fire up the Diddy Kong Racing OST. It'll help, I promise. Ancient Link is perfect for setting the tone, with its energetic and uplifting beat, making you feel welcome. Everfrost Peak captures not just the essence of Christmas, but winter overall. The feeling of watching snow peacefully fall to the ground, going outside with friends, and having an all-day snowball fight. That's the energy that it exudes. Crescent Island is more on the adventurous side. It creates a sense of exciting discovery and that you're on the right path. Again, it just makes you feel good. Greenwood Village has a bit more of a mystic tone, yet curious as the track is constantly changing with its environment. So yeah, I think I've made my point. Diddy Kong Racing's music is half the DNA of the entire game. And to think that I've barely talked about the controls. While they may feel a tad outdated at first, they're easy to get used to. There's also this hilarious mechanic where if you let go of acceleration a bit before hitting a boost, you get this extra large boost of speed and can absolutely clean up races. You don't have to do this, and it's really only helpful if you become familiar with the tracks, but it adds so much exhilaration. And on top of all that, there's even a battle mode. Each level is a little different. There's one where you have to bring eggs to your base, or simply take out enemies with weapons. And there's items, of course, and while they aren't as zany as Mario Karts, they do have a really cool upgrade system. By hitting the same colored balloon, you can upgrade your item 2 extra times. A lot of these upgrades aren't that helpful, but I do like the lock-on missiles quite a bit. There's even boss fights, and this was before Mario Kart DS. You race a Triceratops, Walrus, Octopus, Dragon, and the Whiz Pig himself. All of these are just races to get first place in, but these huge animals are powerful and fast, and they have so much personality and are such a blast to get good at. I could talk about this game for hours, and it is criminal that we haven't gotten another racing game like this. The closest one I can think of is the Crash Team Racing remake on PS4, and that's a remake of the PS1 game, which is the same concept as Diddy Kong Racing. Regardless, if we ever get a new racing title similar to this, I will always love and cherish this game. Donkey Kong has had a pretty wild history over the past 40 years, and while I didn't find that many of the games to be great, the standouts are some of the best of all time. I'm very curious to see where this franchise will be going in the future. This is pretty exciting. I've never really had the chance to just very casually talk about a brand new Nintendo game, because usually on the main channel, I'm putting out something more scripted and more put together, but I just finished Donkey Kong Bonanza, and I'm just going to kind of talk about it because, this might be one of the best 3D platformers I've ever played in my life, and, you know, I've played quite a few of them. I've played pretty much every single Nintendo platformer out there, for the most part, at least all of the main ones, and I gotta say, you know, I was really wondering, why is this game $70? Because that is a lot to spend. Even still, like, yeah, Nintendo's slowly raising the price up and up and up. $80 for Mario Kart World, $70 for this, and I was like, man, I really hope this feels like a $70 game. And yeah, this actually feels like a $70 video game. Man, I think like the best way to describe Donkey Kong Bonanza is that it's kind of like you take Mario Odyssey, take Banjo-Kazooie, and Donkey Kong 64, blend them all together, all the best parts of all those games, it's all of that on steroids. That is basically Donkey Kong Bonanza. The whole time I was playing, I just had this like big dumb smile on my face, and I was just having the time of my life. Why was this game so freaking addicting? Well, it all comes down to the gameplay. And, you know, the gameplay is just smashing stuff. That's all you're doing. But it doesn't get old, and it doesn't get old because the audio video feedback is just so satisfying. Like, this is the ultimate playground game. You see a thing you want to smash, do it. Pretty much everything in the game can be destroyed, and not just that, but it just goes flying in the air, and it just feels so like the sounds that they use when you're like hitting stuff is so just crunchy, and it just feels so nice. And it's not even just breaking stuff, smashing everything in the game. It's the general moveset as well. DK is just really fun to control. He's incredibly fluid. Something I did learn as I was playing is that he's got a roll move, and you can actually pair jumping and rolling. They can kind of be chained together, and this will allow you to go faster than just walking. I guess like the main thing to say is that This game has a very, very deep moveset, just like with Mario Odyssey. It is by far the most fun DK has ever been to control. And this is coming from someone that doesn't really like how DK controls. I've always found being forced to roll and jump in the 2D games to be, I mean, it's satisfying, like it's fine, but I definitely prefer how a Mario game plays compared to DK. But the way that this game works is it's just like, I think the roll move, it's so fast and quick, it just works perfectly. Everything about the moveset just feels so good. And you know what else I like? Every single button on the controller does something different. X punches up, Y punches to the side, B punches down, A is for jumping. And of course, with Pauline, you have the singing move. You can pick stuff up with ZR. Like, it's so weird to play a Nintendo game where every single button is actually utilized properly. Even with like the transformations, you actually swap by using the D-pad. I know, crazy thought, right? Nintendo using the D-pad for something actually useful. Now, the reason that digging is so much fun, not only does it feel really good to use, but you're constantly, and I mean constantly, hit with little pieces of dopamine. So while you're digging, you'll often find these treasure chests that you can kind of just bust open, and the treasure chest might have like a little map to find a hidden banana, or you'll just find gold. Sometimes you'll find like this weird like gold like shimmering, and if you punch that, then boom, just like a ton of gold just comes pouring out. I think it's just the physics, just everything feels so alive in the game. There's so much stuff to collect. DK moves so swiftly that it's really easy to collect everything. Going back to the controller, you know, when you have a bunch of gold surrounding you, you actually don't have to run around and collect it. You can just push the R button, and DK will do this little smash move and just collect everything within his vicinity. And it just, everything just feels so perfect. Like I said, the moveset and the gameplay loop is just perfect. As for what the gold is used for, well, it's used to buy bananas, so this is similar to buying, say, power moons with Mario's coins. It's pretty much the exact same idea, but instead of purple coins, you have these fossils in every single layer. Now, all the layers have their own unique kind of fossils. There's different rarities for each fossil, which is a little bit different to just having 100 purple coins. You're not going to find 100 fossils in every area. It kind of ranges depending on the place. And these fossils are basically used to buy clothes or change DK's color. Now, as far as I'm aware, just changing DK's color doesn't really do anything. It's just an aesthetic choice. But what is really, really cool about this game is the clothes actually make a difference in the gameplay. So just as an example, there's some breeches that DK can wear that'll reduce the damage of things like fire or spikes or even allow him to swim faster. And it's not even just that, but Pauline also gets these exact same upgrades, which basically means that you can mix and match this stuff if you really want to. So let's say you want to give DK better swimming, but then like with Pauline, maybe you'll want her to be able to like slowly recover hearts. There's a lot of different options. I obviously have not unlocked all the outfits yet. I played probably close to 20 hours of the game, and there is still a lot that I have to do. I actually looked at the collectible screen at the very end, and I think there's 777 bananas to find. So if you were not a fan of how many power moons that there were in Mario Odyssey, you might not be a fan of this game. It's very much the same kind of thing where you're finding bananas all the time. And sometimes you'll find bananas just out in the open. Usually it's like after getting through like a little bit of like an obstacle course challenge. And then sometimes you'll find them like hidden inside the sand. There's also sub-courses. So if you remember those from Mario Odyssey where you jump into a green or silver pipe, do a little bit of an obstacle challenge, well, Donkey Kong Bonanza has the exact same thing. You might end up battling a bunch of enemies. You might be running through a course or something with a time limit. There's a pretty big variety of things here. I would almost say there's more variety with these sub-courses compared to like Mario Odyssey. Now, something else about the game that I really liked is when you do collect a banana, you know, you hear the voice say, "Ooh, banana." And I butchered that pretty badly, but just like with Mario Odyssey's jingle, the "Oh Banana" jingle is gonna be stuck in your head for the rest of your life. It is deeply satisfying to get the jingle. Not only is the time a little bit faster than it was in Mario Odyssey, so you can get back to playing a little bit quicker, but you get this really fun, expressive like shot of DK either sticking his tongue out, he looks furious, or whatever it may be, he's doing some sort of cool pose. Even Pauline is posing with him too. And even every single transformation has its own unique pose. So there's a lot to look at. Once you get your banana, you get the satisfying sound effect, you get the satisfying voice, and you get a cool pose. It's great stuff. It's really, really great stuff. Now, something that is really new to this game compared to Mario Odyssey is the skill tree. And I was kind of curious how this was going to be, because I've played a lot of games with skill trees, and sometimes when you're upgrading your stuff, you don't really notice that much of a difference. Even when you've like fully maxed out everything, it still just kind of feels like you're playing the same game. So I was wondering, is actually upgrading stuff feeling substantially different? And I would say the answer is a little bit of yes and a little bit of no. So you can do a lot of different upgrades in this game. You can increase, your strength, your health, and I fully maxed out, I think, my punch so far, and honestly, I didn't really notice a difference because I was kind of leveling up my I think it's called a power punch, technically. I was leveling it up as I was going through the game, so the layers of just material to break through were already getting stronger and stronger. When I go back through and 100% get all the bananas, I imagine I'll notice a difference a little bit more, but even if that is something that you don't really notice as you're upgrading, there are also a lot of your moves get like little tweaks and upgrades. So just as like an example, when DK smashes R, he'll basically release this little sonar to help you find things in the sand. And basically, you can increase the length of the sonar, and that is actually pretty helpful. And every single transformation also has little bits and upgrades. Sometimes, like the ability you're using will last longer, it'll add this little thing here and there. There's a lot of variety here. It's definitely one of the better skill trees that I have used. Now I want to talk about the transformations really quickly. I guess the closest comparison would be like the captures from Super Mario Odyssey, and I guess it's the same idea. I don't know if I would necessarily say that though, because you can kind of just use the transformations whenever you want. As long as you have enough Bananza charged up, and that's really easy to do, you just collect gold, and there's gold everywhere, then you can swap transformations on the fly, and you can even swap while you're in the middle of a transformation. So it's really, really handy. It kind of reminds me of Bowser's Fury a little bit when you're swapping between power-ups, except the game doesn't freeze. The game just keeps playing as you're going. It's kind of like the same concept as that. Now, at this point, I am going to be talking about spoilers, so if you don't want spoilers, then pause the video, come back to it later. But yeah, now we're going to go into spoiler territory. I'm even going to talk about the final boss and stuff because it was absolutely crazy. So let's go over the transformations. So first, we have Kong Bananza. Basically just makes Donkey Kong really strong. You can also charge up your punch, and there's an additional upgrade to where basically when you're in the middle of charging your punch, you have like an extra layer of defense, which is kind of cool. Then there's the Zebra Bananza. This allows you to run faster. You can also run across thin surfaces in water. It looks absolutely ridiculous. I didn't find it to be super helpful. It was obviously, used in certain levels, like when you first unlock the zebra transformation, you're going to use it to get across like certain platforms and stuff, but later in the game you don't use it as often. Now, one of my favorites honestly is the Ostrich Bananza, and this is very similar to something like Glide-On from Mario Odyssey, where basically, you'll take off, you'll start gliding, and there's even like little wind currents. If you can catch that, get a little bit more height, which is nice, but over time the glide will start to slowly descend and go down. But what has been upgraded, because the best way to compare it is like through Glide-On. So if you are comparing it to that, it's kind of the same thing, but you can also drop egg bombs, which is something else you have to upgrade through the skill tree. And the egg bombs are really hard to aim with because it really does. I also love how the sound effect when you're dropping it is very, very cartoonish, but it's really hard to aim with. The bombs are pretty light, so it takes some practice to get used to, but once you get used to it, it is really, really satisfying to drop a couple of egg bombs as you're dropping down. Then we have these two extra transformations that I don't think were shown anywhere, at least not officially by Nintendo. One of those is an Elephant Bananza. So yeah, now we have two Nintendo games in the span of 2 years. We have Mario Bros. Wonder, where Mario turns into an elephant, and now Donkey Kong turns into an elephant. Can't wait for Legend of Zelda, where he turns into an elephant for some reason. It's really weird, but it is very different compared to, Mario Bros. Wonder, obviously. They're completely different games. What's really cool about the elephant is he can actually suck stuff up with his trunk, And not only is this really helpful for just clearing out stuff, but it also turns into like little rocks, and you can throw those rocks. That's actually pretty cool. Just the ability you can kind of just vacuum everything, that alone just feels good to do. Just seeing all of the materials get sucked up. Then the final one is a snake bonanza. And basically, the best way to describe it is it's kind of like Spring Mario and Shadow the Hedgehog's Chaos Control combined together. And I know that sounds weird. That's because it is. But yeah, basically you're able to charge up your jumps. You're constantly bouncing around. You also have a little bit of a double jump, which is really nice. And there's a glare attack where you can kind of stop time temporarily. I don't know where that came from. The glare move just seems super random. I guess the developers wanted it to feel a little more distinct compared to the other ones. So you know what? Screw it. Give him chaos control. Why not? But yeah, I think that's pretty much everything I have to say about the transformations. I guess something else that I found really surprising about this game is just how big it is. Oh my god, this game is so freaking big. I remember I got to sub-layer like 900 or 1000, and I'm like, okay, this has to be the end. It's not the end. It goes to sub-level 1600. So like I said earlier, basically 16 levels, and almost all of them are full packed to the brim with all sorts of secrets and things to find. This game, it's just ridiculously big. And pretty much the only level that was kind of small was there's this racing one, which I want to get into next. And it involves Diddy Kong and Dixie Kong. And I would say that's most akin to something like Ruin Kingdom or Cloud Kingdom from Mario Odyssey, where I wouldn't necessarily say it feels incomplete. It just feels like the developers didn't have any other ideas for the kingdom itself, I guess. I'm not really sure. But I do want to talk about this layer really quickly because it is really interesting. So yeah, this is the only time you really talk with Diddy and Dixie Kong. And for whatever reason, they want to do a race with you, which I find to be very funny. Is this a callback to Diddy Kong Racing because you're racing Diddy Kong? Maybe it is. And if you think about it, Dixie Kong is in Diddy Kong Racing DS. Maybe it's a callback to both of those games. But then it gets weirder. At this point, you begin the race and you're on Rambi and you got these barrels next to you and you're like, okay, hold on. Like I was going through like a complete like mind melt when this happened. Are they calling back the canceled Donkey Kong Racing game? Because for those that don't know, there was supposed to be a sequel to Diddy Kong Racing called Donkey Kong Racing, and there's one trailer for it, and you can see Donkey Kong on top of a Rambi, and the way that it looks in this game looks extremely similar to the trailer. And then the barrels on the side, it's like a callback to Donkey Kong Barrel Blast on the Wii. So random, so random. It's also really funky to control. Very, very strange to control, but it's pretty fun once you kind of get the hang of it. But I wanted to talk about that layer just because I thought it was really interesting. I'm not going to talk about every single layer, and it's actually kind of hard to do that because maybe that's another slight drawback to the game. The themes themselves are not very distinct, at least not at first. I would say probably the first 7 to 8 sublayers all kind of look the same. Like, yeah, some of them are kind of cavey and foresty, but things really don't get super interesting until you get to the resort layer. And that's where it's like, okay, now the more creative like themes are starting to come through. I wouldn't necessarily say it's a bad thing, but maybe it is to an extent. Like I would even argue that like even Banjo-Kazooie or, you know, Mario Odyssey again, those levels are more interesting aesthetically, whereas Donkey Kong Bonanza, a lot of the levels really do blend together. Maybe that's a downside, but for me, it didn't really matter all that much. I thought they were different enough, but they definitely are not like super distinct. Let's talk about Kid Pauline real quick. So this was really weird to get used to because, you know, we've only ever seen Pauline as an adult. So running around with Kid Pauline, pretty strange, but I gotta be honest, you know, after, you know, playing through the whole game, she is very endearing, she's very sweet, and as the game goes on, she does actually develop, I guess you could call this the character arc of the game. She starts out where she's kind of scared of singing in front of everybody because to basically get the Bonanza powers, you have to talk to these elders, and the elders basically are the ones that give you these powers, but Pauline has to sing in front of them. And at first she's nervous, and then by the end she's like totally cool with it. That's pretty much the most, I guess, plot you're gonna get out of the game because there's really not much else beyond that. And I do want to talk about the performance issues because this is something that's been talked about quite a bit, but does it really matter when you're actually playing? And frankly, I didn't really care. You know, yeah, there definitely is performance issues. You're going to notice it a lot in the cutscenes. You're going to notice it in a few of the bosses. But I would say overall, the game runs extremely well. There's really not much to worry about. Like, I would really only say one boss in particular, which I will be talking about at the end of this. There's really only one boss where it's like, whoa, okay, now I'm seeing the lag. But for the most part, the lag is just in cutscenes. It barely affects gameplay whatsoever, and maybe it'll bother some people, but for me, it just wasn't very frequent, and I didn't really mind that much. And I guess real quick, let's just touch on the bosses too. These are probably the weakest part of the game. I would actually say the bosses are... It's weird. I would probably say the bosses are worse than the performance issues. I would say that's the worst part. And it's not because the bosses are bad. They're all, well, mostly original. And they all have like creative patterns and stuff. They're really cool looking, but they're just way too easy. And like, yeah, it's a Nintendo game. Of course it's gonna be easy, right? This is a game for kids. Man, they are really, really easy in this game. I would even say the Mario Odyssey bosses are harder than this game. That, to give you a frame of reference, it is like no effort to beat these bosses. The only time I died, there was one boss where I didn't know what to do, so I died a couple times, and then the final boss, I lost, I think, like once or twice just because it finally started to get hard by the very end. But for the most part, they are an absolute breeze, and I do wish they were a little bit harder, at least later in the game. It is what it is, right? You know what? That's just kind of how Nintendo games are. And man, there are a ton of just Mario Odyssey elements that are present here. So if you're someone that didn't really like Mario Odyssey, you might like this game more. You might not really care about it because really it is so Mario Odyssey coded. The UI looks pretty much the same. The fast traveling menu works very similarly besides the lag and the 3D. And there is pinning, which is really nice, but for the most part, basically the same thing. And even the way that the cutscenes are presented, the way that like everything's timed out, you can just tell that it was developed by the Mario Odyssey team. So now I want to talk about the main spoilers, and that is the final sublayer as well as the final boss, because my God, I don't know if it's my favorite Nintendo boss of all time, but it is up there as one of the most cinematic and just awesome ones. I'd say that the final area kind of reminds me of like a Kirby boss. So if you've played a Kirby game recently, like Star Allies or Forgotten Land, and you know how batshit insane those bosses can get, this is kind of the same idea. But before I go into that, I kind of just want to talk about the story just to get a bit of context. So the general story here is that Pauline and DK, they're trying to get to this thing called the Banana Diem route to grant a wish, but then Void Kong, who's the main villain that you see in all the trailers online, he wants to get there first. So basically the entire game, you and Void Kong are racing to the route. And then by the time you both get to the route, you fight Void Kong. It looks like he loses, but then out of nowhere, he just comes back. He tries to touch the route, and this is where the game goes from, okay, this is really great, to, oh my God. Because you know what happens? Void Kong gets smacked out of the air by King K. Rool. Yeah, he just comes completely out of nowhere. We haven't seen King K. Rool in a Donkey Kong game since, I think, the Nintendo DS. It's been like 20 years, and just out of nowhere, he's just here now. And it's not even just that, but the last area is just filled with classic Donkey Kong Country remixed music as well as enemies. And these enemies, you don't see them anywhere else in the game. They are only in the final area. This includes the critters, you got Mini Necky, there's even zingers throwing rocks at you. What I really love about this too is that whenever you kill a critter, and they make that really goofy sound as well. Like, I can't believe they actually kept the sound exactly the same as from the 90s. That is just awesome. And then the battle with K. Rool is just over the top, absolutely ridiculous. You end up going to New Donk City by the end, but this is also where the worst of the lag comes in. So as you can see here, there is a lot of lag in this footage. The game runs perfectly fine. It doesn't necessarily hinder the gameplay, but it is really jarring to see the frames go down so much from the boss fight, which I guess is a little bit disappointing, but it's really hard to be disappointed when this game also includes a fake out ending, just like from Donkey Kong Country 1, and then the final phase takes place in the boxing ring from Donkey Kong 64. Like, man, you can really tell that the developers really love Donkey Kong. I actually believe the director or producer has already gone out and said that he played every single Donkey Kong game before or during developing Donkey Kong Bonanza, and you can tell because there are so many fun little nods. Like the boxing ring from DK64, who the hell would have expected that to make a reoccurrence? Yeah, I really like this game. I don't know what it's gonna be like post-game going for 100%. I'm not really sure. As for the main channel, I might have a video on Donkey Kong Bonanza. What I'm thinking of doing is trying to smash everything in all the sub-layers just to see what it looks like at the end. Now, I don't know if I want to do that because that is going to take an absurd amount of time. I believe I heard that someone already tried to do this in the tutorial level, and it took them 3 hours. 3 hours in the tutorial to smash everything that you possibly can. Because what's really unique about the game is that regardless of where you go, unless you leave or go to a sub-level, the terrain you destroy stays exactly where it is. So I thought it'd be kind of cool just to see what it looks like when everything is destroyed. But there's so many sub-layers. I don't know if I'm going to do it. If I am, the video's not coming out for a while. I am super excited to go back to play. I've actually been playing so much, my right arm is starting to get kind of sore. So I'm going to take a break for a little bit. We'll get this video out, but I'll be 100% in the game, and then maybe there'll be a video on the main channel about it. We've all thought of doing this. What would Donkey Kong Bonanza's world look like if you were to smash literally everything that you can smash? How long would it take? And would it be worth it? Well, today, I wanted to let the intrusive thoughts take over. This is the smallest area in the game. How long could it possibly take? I mean, DK's quick and nimble, and one hell of a guy too. Would you believe me if I said it took almost an hour just to clear out this first hallway? Not the whole tutorial, just the hallway. Yeah, this took way longer than I thought it was going to. And it wasn't for the reasons that you'd expect. The challenging culprit here is the walls. The unbreakable portions aren't just flat and easy to knock off. There's tons of crevices and corners, and the stone I was trying to clear out kept getting stuck. These spots were so small that DK couldn't just punch them. His hitbox was simply too big. So the only solution here was to throw rocks at these tiny spots until they eventually broke free. What was also difficult was breaking the stones near the ceiling. My goal was to smash from top to bottom, because I didn't want to have to keep climbing up whenever I'd fall, but it didn't really go as planned. What this led to was creating 2 different pathways in the air, which was confusing, and I also had to worry about these chunks that don't fall. They float in the air until they're destroyed. By the end, I had a lot of teeny tiny chunks floating in the middle and had no choice but to constantly throw rocks at them. Once the hallway was done, I started chipping away at everything else in the next room, and that includes this conveyor belt of dirt. It took me a few minutes to realize that it was impossible to get rid of. It would always respawn no matter what you did. There's a handful of terrain that infinitely respawns in all the layers, so if you see any left over when we've cleared out a level, that's why. After another 30 minutes or so, I finally cleared out this area. There might still be a few teeny tiny particles of dirt stuck in the ceiling, but it was getting to the point where I was running out of rocks to throw. This was about as close as I was gonna get, and it honestly looked really cool anyway. It was like I transformed the space into a sprawling cave filled with stalagmites. I mean, it was kind of that before, but now it's more cavey! And after that, I finally got the first banana. Oh, it only took me, what, 2.5 hours? And they said the Cuphead tutorial was hard. The section with the banana was pretty easy. Clearing out the chunks stuck in the wall or ceiling took less time simply because the space itself was much smaller. I eventually got myself to the bottom and honestly forgot that there was this entire room to do still. But thankfully, most of the ceiling didn't have dirt, which was a huge relief. Once this room was done, I made my way to the next one and it had another conveyor belt of dirt. I already knew that I wasn't going to be able to clear that stuff out of the way, so I made my way around and started smashing up the sides. After just a few minutes though, I realized that the ceiling was much taller than I anticipated. I climbed up this pile of dirt and oh my god, look at how big this hidden area is. There's even a monkey up here that says he was hiding, so I guess I was going to be smashing way more than anticipated. I figured the best way to do this was to go from top to bottom, because these walls for whatever reason aren't climbable. As I made my way through all the layers, I discovered that there was a wall on one side to prevent me from falling. I also noticed that the monkey was on the other side of the wall, so of course, I had to do this. I have no idea if this was intentional or not, but that is pretty hilarious. This has massive throw the penguin off the cliff energy from Mario 64. Except, whoa, hold on, he's back? Okay, maybe he has a secret jet barrel like Diddy Kong? Either way, the fact that I can send him into a death pit is still funny. But alas, after almost an hour, I managed to clear out all this crap and could finally move on to the last segment, the gold room. But real quick, just look at how different this area is. Having the rocks gone makes this room look way more open and pretty. The gold room is a really fun area because the gold breaks much more easily than rock. However, I got pretty overwhelmed when I noticed that the room was massive and the entire ceiling was covered in rock. Dude, it takes so long to throw rocks at other rocks before they break. I'm not mentally prepared for this. But thankfully, the gold managed to save the day. And that's because it explodes when you throw it. Why does it explode? I don't know, but it saved me a ton of time. And not only that, throwing it next to these bananas also allowed me to break all this gold surrounding the bananas. I wasn't initially sure if throwing the gold would count as a banana hit, but it apparently doesn't. So I was able to use the gold's explosive power to completely clear out the area. Once that was done, my focus was on chipping away at the rock on the walls, as well as throwing gold at the ceiling. This took forever, but again, I'm just grateful that the gold had an actual blast radius that would clean out the crevices surrounding it. After almost 2 more hours, I threw my last piece of gold and was actually done. And yeah, this one tutorial level took me almost 7 hours total, and that's when I realized that I needed help. There's just no way I'm gonna be able to do all these layers, so I asked a few friends to see if any of them would be interested in helping. Game Champ said, "Sounds fun." And D-Pad was willing to help with some of the layers. As we get to different areas, you'll hear me or D-Pad talk about the ones that we cleared out. I looked around the map and honestly, this didn't look all that bad. A good chunk of this area is metal, so I quickly shot up to the top and switched to the elephant transformation. I have been waiting for hours to use this, and it felt so good to not have to smash everything manually. Just watching the pieces evaporate in front of me was ecstatic. And even better is that I can play as the elephant literally the entire time. Most of the terrain spawns treasure chests every few seconds, and a lot of these chests have gold. Gold is what's used to refill the banana meter, which means that I'll have a full meter by just doing what I'm doing. There's only a few types of terrain that don't spawn the treasure chests, and they also aren't very common materials. So what this led to was just trying to stay near the top as often as possible and ensuring that I was sucking up every last morsel. And while it felt great to do this, it was also pretty mind-numbing. I went from playing Donkey Kong Bananza to Vacuum Cleaner Simulator. So I fired up some podcasts and just tried to stay as focused as possible. And the elephant was not perfect. Sometimes the rock was stubborn and would still get stuck to the sides. To combat this, I would switch to the ostrich, jump into the air, and punch while floating. I usually had to do this jump a few times before getting everything, but it was surprisingly effective. The only thing that was a bit troublesome was the rocks in the water. I wasn't able to suck these out, and I could only punch to the ground so much. So unfortunately, I had to leave a lot of the rock there simply because it wasn't possible to break. I personally wouldn't count this as required terrain to smash anyway because you can't stand on it, but I'll leave that up to you to decide. While I was going through, I nabbed a few bananas along the way. I was getting so much money too that I could very easily fill up this golden cactus thing. I somehow had over 60k gold, but I imagine I might max out my cash by the time I'm done doing all this. I also needed to bomb these spikes, and that had another banana. And at this point, I had conquered pretty much everything. The level honestly didn't look that different to me. Obviously, it looked bigger because all the materials were gone, but the colors were so similar that it's kind of hard to tell. The only thing that was left to do was to go into this cave that was really out of the way. I had to use the snake and ostrich just to get in there. But once all that stuff was smashed up, I was completely done and we can move on to the next sublayer.
Hey, D-Pad Gamer here. So, Sublayer 100, aka the Lagoon Layer, has 3 distinct parts. SL100 has by far the most destructible terrain of the 3. For some very small, shallow bits of water, destroying the surrounding terrain will make the water disappear. Meanwhile, bigger bodies of water are always enclosed within walls of green metal. Something I noticed is that as you destroy terrain, some of the key spots like tuning forks, getaways, challenge entrances, all remain in place, often given a floating ring of metal to sit on. If you teleport to some of these spots, the game actually has a failsafe to keep you from falling immediately. This takes the form of a small, circular platform of pure gold. While this means you could technically keep respawning gold, it's nowhere near as lucrative as just demolishing the terrain. Also, it becomes increasingly apparent that the game does not expect you to destroy all of the breakable terrain. Objects and characters popping in is way more pronounced once the terrain is gone, and in camera mode, certain parts of the metal terrain would actually fade in and out just by adjusting the camera zoom. Both SL101 and SL102 went very quickly, only having a relatively thin layer of rock and dirt atop flat metal platforms. During your average playthrough, Sublayer 101 fills up with water, raising a bridge and platforms, which cannot be undone. So while I couldn't destroy anything down there, there were no collectibles that remained on that terrain. Even the trees actually float up, so they weren't safe from my Kong punches. The Fisher Kongs were also fairly vocal about not being able to fish after I demolished their boats. Next, the hilltop layer is one big flat Neptunite disk with a few protrusions of the dark material. This one, with the hole leading to sublayer 300, vaguely looks like a GameCube. I cut through the land splitting into roughly 4 quarters. I then tried and failed to destroy the terrain in a measured, consistent pattern, instead opting to just doing different stuff, like standing in one spot and spinning around with the Elephant Bananza's vacuum ability, creating a donut-shaped moat. I cleared away far too much with Kong Bananza's long-reaching charge attacks, and so on. It left me with a lot of errant fragments just floating around. Tossing chunks to break those helped, but I learned a valuable lesson. If you're going to destroy the entire world, do it carefully. Once all that was done, I was left with an odd sight. Many of the less important NPCs that usually stand on dirt, rock, or grass would spawn in place as I approached, then fall to the flat Neptunite platform. The object pop-in gave me some real Sonic Frontier vibes. A lot of it looked like a developer's test level, random objects and NPCs just sitting around in a void.
The canyon layer was my very first big level to tackle, and my god. It may not look like it'd take that long, but these are thick layers. Not only are there 3 different areas within this one sublayer, but most of them had tons of rock and dirt to sift through. As usual, I used the elephant to suck everything up. Although I found out later that platforms like the spinning one would respawn no matter what you did, but that didn't matter when about 95% of the walkable land could be smashed up. But man, I spent so many hours doing this that I completely forgot that I was even playing a Donkey Kong game. A few hours in, I only finished a couple of these islands, and it just felt like the rock would never end. And on top of that, there was a lot of rock underneath the levels that I had no idea how to reach yet. As for what the island looks like when it's empty, it kinda just looks the same as the rest of them. Except that the canyon had a pretty bad glare, so it was a bit hard to see anything at the very bottom. This game has a lighting setup in which it switches depending on how high or low you are to the ground, which is why it looks kind of off sometimes. I was in this layer for so long that I think I bugged the game out by accident. Whenever you hit a treasure chest from digging, it'll disappear after a bit of time. However, not only were my chests not going away, but they also weren't spewing out treasure anymore. Maybe there was a safeguard to prevent the game from lagging or crashing, or perhaps there's a limit to how many times a treasure chest can be opened in one instance per area. I'm not really sure what happened, but it didn't matter considering I've maxed out my balloons and have over 100,000 gold. So I'm pretty much set on cash for forever. I'm never gonna run out. After spending several hours getting most of the rock, all that was left to do was the stuff that was floating above the death pit. Thankfully, with all my balloons, I could fall pretty much as often as I wanted. Since the rock was so thick, I flew over to it with the ostrich and sucked up as much as I could. But even still, this didn't quite work as there was a lot of rock that was still unreachable. It was at this point that it was time to switch to co-op play. Using Pauline, you're able to use mouse mode and controller with a second controller. What she does is shout phrases, and those can be used to break rock. Something that I learned that was really helpful is that you can absorb materials by pointing your cursor towards it and holding ZR. So what I did was absorb these tiny little gold pieces, and this turned Pauline's words into gold, which are explosive and more powerful. So I was able to continuously absorb gold and plow through the rock until it was finally all gone. The only thing I wanted to try destroying now was this rock under the ground, but for whatever reason, you can't actually touch it, despite it showing up on the map. But alas, I could finally move on to areas 301 and 302, because of course I'm not done with the canyon yet. 301 wasn't quite as bad, and that's just because there was a lot less to suck up. However, I had one more big obstacle. You see all these walls? Well, normally you take a minecart and blow them up with bombs to get fossils and stuff, but since I had to get rid of all this rock, I had to meticulously fly over to these walls and very carefully suck everything up. This was pretty hard to do because the walls are so thin, so you don't have much to stand on. And while there are floors and hidden gold, it only lasts for so long. I found myself running out of gold and burning through balloons because there was nowhere good to stand. I had to use Pauline quite a few times to clear out little chunks that I missed by accident, and this took over an hour to finish. The main thing that I didn't like was that when you'd fall, sometimes the balloon would spawn DK back to the beginning instead of where you were, meaning I'd have to fly all the way back to where I was. But once that was done, 302 was pretty easy. It's just one flat platform, and despite some tough metal to suck up, it didn't take all that long.
Located at sublayer 400 is the Divide, a very small and simple level that asks an important question: ice cream or poison? To help you make the decision are two identical stretches of Neptunite covered in either ice and snow, or dirt, wood, and leaves. The forest side wasn't too bad, but clearing away terrain above a bottomless pit meant I went through just so many balloons. Thankfully they're cheap, but the constant falling and running back definitely took some time. The freezer side of the Divide was surprisingly not very cool. The ice and snow went quickly enough, but the pure ice's increased durability really tested my patience. Pauline was really important with clearing away those last few chunks.
Next up was the freezer layer. This is another pretty big level, but it didn't seem that bad at first. I decided to head to one of the high points to start, and that's when I realized how annoying the ice was going to be. Not only is it slippery, but it's not climbable. Most of the ice is on the walls and ceiling, so I had to be very cautious and try not to fall. A lot of the ice is inside this cave, and this is a deep cave. It really felt like never-ending ice. And then when you get outside, there's ice surrounding all of the edges right here. And look how far down this goes. It literally sinks down into the death zone. You can actually punch all the way to the bottom too, and a balloon will spawn. So what this means is that I'm gonna have to suck up this ice and be careful to not burn through all my balloons. But I decided to take a break from that and go back into the cave. I made it into this other room and there's pillars all over the place. This isn't that big of a deal, but it meant that I had to use Pauline for a lot of the ice on the ceiling as it was completely unreachable otherwise. Once that was taken care of, there wasn't much left to tackle. It took a long time considering how awkward the ice spots are, but I've managed to get it all. I eventually moved on to 501, and this layer was a lot simpler. There wasn't as much ice to worry about on the walls, it was mostly just sucking up the usual dirt and rocks. Although this was my first time taking care of the lava. The two main components about lava is that it makes you move slower for some reason, and it doesn't produce any gold. Since I was also next to a bunch of rocks, I tried going back and forth to ensure that I'd keep getting gold refills. Outside of some ice and tricky spots, 501 was pretty easy to finish. 502 was kind of the same thing, but there was way more lava. But again, it just required a lot of patience to clean up everything. And 503 was the easiest of them all. We got some dirt on the outside ring, and that's about it. So after several hours of time, sublayer 500 was finally done.
The forest, of course, has a lot of poison. This wouldn't have bothered me much if it wasn't for the fact that just about every tree and island sticking up out of the poison has no underlying Neptunite, bedrock, or anything. One moment I'm smashing through wood and the next I have a lung full of toxic water. Locating the fossils to purchase and upgrade the poison resist pants helped, as did a switch up of strats instead of using the elephant's vacuum on low-lying terrain which leaves behind stubborn bits of wood just above the poison surface. I started really utilizing the snake Bananza. Its unlockable meteor punch ability, where you charge up, then hold B to dive punch downwards, clears a large flat circle of terrain. With this, I could clear layers of terrain down to the poison, then bounce and roll back to safety. Still, I did die and respawn a lot. That probably wasn't helped by the fact that I just started swimming in the poison, letting my health tick down and get reset with cans of apple juice. That said, another issue with the forest, especially in sublayer 601, was the spiky red vines all over the place. They could not be punched through, so I either had to vacuum them up, or throw stuff, or often use Pauline for the really hard to reach bits. Unfortunately, the tallest red vine stretches up above this sublayer's invisible ceiling, meaning I literally could not destroy it. Also, the green rubber blocks could not be destroyed nor climbed, which made navigation a bit tricky in a few spots. Since this area has multiple large floating islands, I got in the habit of using the ostrich to navigate to the landmass's lower point, then Kong Bananza to clear away a large flat expanse that the elephant could safely and efficiently vacuum atop. Once everything above was handled, I would then clear the lower bits pretty quick. I still fell quite often and had to fly or teleport back, but this more methodical approach helped a lot. Also, I should note that the game is odd about whether or not the map renders the indestructible metal platforms that you can find all throughout the game. I would glance at the map, notice loads of weirdly damaged bits of wood, then go back into the game just to realize that they were all trapped within those platforms of various shapes and sizes. Along with this, the indestructible platforms were often set to fade away sooner than the terrain, so at just the right distance you could see the impossible to destroy terrain that was otherwise hidden. Down in 602, I didn't encounter any new challenges, though the vine-wrapped tree that extends up into the ceiling was impossible to clear past a certain point. That's fine though, because clearing away the lowest level left me with a large expanse of bounce pads. It was quite the reward, feeling like this game's version of a trampoline park. After that is the junction, down at sublayer 700, which is the inverse of the divide, bringing two themed paths back into one. While the pure ice was still annoying, both paths here have a lower platform that made the excavation process much quicker. Aside from that, the only other noteworthy thing about this level is the bridge over to the platform in front of the sinkhole. The whole point of visiting the two prior layers was to build this crystalline stone bridge, so destroying it was funny in a kinda strange way.
This was one of the shortest levels to do, and also one of the strangest ones. To start, there's a ton of islands all over the place, and none of them have a skeleton, which meant that after sucking one up, I'd have to teleport back into the sky and jump for another one. I must have teleported like 30 times or something. There's more islands in the sky than there are in Tears of the Kingdom. But and once all those were done, I had to do a ton of smashing into the ground. Since the floor is only water, it's impossible for me to properly clear out all the terrain. What I did as a substitute was smash the sand in until the water covered it. So while it wasn't a perfect solution, at least by the end, it still looked like I was in a giant glass globe. And it looked kinda cool. It was almost like I was experiencing high tide on some random island out in the middle of nowhere. And now we're back to a big sublayer. Tempest is absolutely massive and extremely thick. While 900 is essentially just a big oval, I spent quite a few hours going around it and slowly lowering the layer. On top of that, there was a ton of rocks stuck on the walls that was a pain to suck up. But at this point, I've kind of mastered the art of breaking wall rocks. It takes a combination of using Pauline, the elephant, and sometimes just regular DK. The inside of the temple had a lot of grooves to go around, but overall, it wasn't that bad. It just took an extremely long time to get through. But I wasn't done yet, because now we've got 901. While this room is significantly smaller, my biggest obstacle is all of this lava on the ceiling. There was no way to reach it as DK, so I had no choice but to spam Pauline shouts to clear it all out. And interestingly, the lava drips don't even come from the lava, they're coated into the ceiling itself. It's not that it matters because I was wearing an outfit that makes me immune to getting hurt by the lava, but I thought it looked weird to see the dripping when the ceiling was starting to get cleared. This made 901 particularly annoying as I had to keep going around the edges of the walls and tried to find new spots in which Pauline could reach the lava. But when that was finally done, I moved on to 903. I was gonna do 902 next, but I wanted to knock out a quick area first. The only real thing I had to worry about was getting rid of the statues, as that'd be a lot harder to reach if they weren't the main focus. Tempest in general had a ton of statues, and they all had to take priority first. As for the rest of 903, I was mostly just going in this huge circle, sucking away at all the lava. And I don't know what it was, but something about this circle felt like it was never going to end. It was way bigger than it looked, and it took about an hour or so to finish. Then we've got 902. This area was one of the more complex ones. I started by focusing on this big dome that had glass shards surrounded by a skeleton. Unfortunately, the elephant did not work that well as I kept falling off for some reason, so I had to use a lot of regular DK to get the smaller chunks. On the other side was a big cave, and this had a ton of rocks on the walls. This also took quite a long time to get through. I'm just glad that the elephant head was mostly a skeleton and had a thin layer of rocks surrounding it. After that though were a ton of smaller islands. The only real obstacle here is that lightning strikes at you every 10 to 15 seconds. While I had to constantly roll out of the way and avoid getting zapped, this actually kind of sped up my progress a tiny bit. Each time the lightning struck the ground, it would also zap away the rocks near it. I even ended up using the lightning to get some of of these hard to reach rocks on the sides quite a few times. So after a few more hours, I cleared out as much rock as I could and was completely done.
Now, when I first dived into Sublayer 1000, aka the pit, I was excited. This whole layer is just stone and dirt with little to no indestructible framework to get in the way. This should be quick and easy, no? No. I tackled this layer chaotically at first before the magnitude of what I was dealing with became apparent. Then I got methodical, then tired and angry and annoyed and so on. I may have recorded some downtime here and there, but based on my footage, I spent about 16.5 hours on just this one layer. For context, my entire playthrough, without jumping, that is, only took 17 hours, so there's a lot to cover, but I'll keep it brief. The terrain of Sublayer 600 and 601 are contained within mostly smooth bedrock containers. 600 is like a weirdly shaped trash can, and 601 is a big rounded cube. Both are filled with stone, mud, and dirt, and numerous little bits of open space where certain objects and characters are waiting to be uncovered. This means it was very easy to clear large swaths of land, but sometimes I would accidentally clear away the roof of a cave, and now have an annoyingly long fall to contend with. A lot of time was wasted having to teleport or climb back up. Still, I made progress, and after clearing away all of the walls, I was able to start sectioning off chunks of terrain, and I turned them into more manageable goals. The snake's meteor punch once again helped, as the smooth rounded walls it would leave behind helps with navigation and efficiency. It's way easier to vacuum a wall up when you have another solid wall to hang on to. Something I noticed, which is especially obvious once falling through the emptied level, is the various pockets of fog that persist independent of the breakable terrain. This is a result of the game kind of pre-baking, if that's the right term, its camera and lighting effects. This isn't a knock against the game, but it did make navigation difficult at times, as even when there was open space and seemingly light above, there were spots where you just couldn't see anything. By the very end, when I had finally cleared away the last of 601, I felt conflicted. I was both excited to move on to something else and hesitant to let go of such a weird area. I'm never going to be able to fall through this unfilled landfill again, or chunk surf across its smooth stone floors. But that's fine, because ultimately, leaving means I won't have to deal with those annoying peekaboo-boid enemies ever again. Good riddance.
Here we have one of the more unique layers, and also the smallest outside of the tutorial. I wasn't really expecting the racer layer to be that hard, and I started off by breaking the gold around the trophy. While this wasn't much of a hurdle per se, I couldn't just blast through it because of the way the gold breaks in DK Bananza. The breakage is very unpredictable with gold. It shatters instantaneously like it's glass, and it was really easy to miss tiny chunks of it as well. With some patience, I broke it all off and also collected the dirt underneath it. Once that was done, I started focusing on the islands. There's a few located here, and none of them have skeletons, so I had to be very careful on how I was cleaning up the rocks. I basically had to get down to one tiny bit and then jump up and suck to finish it, as there wouldn't be a way to return here. There was also this island very close to the starting area, and I honestly wasn't sure how to reach it. So I used dirt stacking to get up top, but I think there was probably an easier way to get up there, like with a cannon or something, because there was an NPC chillin' just waiting for me. The racetrack itself was shockingly easy. It was mostly just light mud, so despite its large size, it was also one thin layer. It was a nice change of pace, I'm not gonna lie. So after a couple hours, the racing layer was completely done, and it doesn't even look all that different. At least when you're on the racing track, because the skeleton so closely follows it. Moving right along to the next layer, this one has 5 areas to go through. 1200 is pretty quick. There's nothing crazy to do here. Not even the walls took that long to clear out. 1201 was a pretty fun one, and I wanted to try something out. I was wondering if it was possible to do the zipline part without using the zipline, so I tried it out with Ostrich, and I somehow pulled it off on the first try. It was scary to do, but wasn't really all that hard. 1202 was also pretty simple. There were a couple of floating islands, but I got to them with the snake and the rest is a breeze. It's kind of funny how the more of this that I play, the faster it feels. I'm still spending the same 3 to 6 hours per layer, but it just doesn't feel as long anymore. 1203 was a bit different though, seeing as there was was a chunk of thin platforms and clouds surrounding them. I basically had to visit all the different chunks, suck up the ground, and move on. There was also a lot of rock on the ceiling, but I used Pauline as well as this moving platform to reach it all. The rest of 1203 was essentially a big circle. I took out all the glass snakes first and worked my way around until everything eventually disappeared. Strangely enough, this is the brightest level that I've seen after getting rid of the terrain. The lighting on a lot of the Bananza levels is very orange and dark, but this one is quite the opposite. 1204 was the final area, and was the smallest of the bunch. It barely even looks that different with the glass and snow gone. The skeleton is very closely matched with all the terrain.
The Groove layer is a nice and easy level to destroy as it's pretty small with not a lot of destructible terrain. Aside from some of the lower rooms, I only had a thin layer of stone on the walls and floor to clean up. It made me feel like I was pressure washing the place. There was one issue though, as I offhandedly completed the post-game mission of assisting the Groove Tones and rebuilding the speaker. This unfortunately regenerated a lot of the layer's terrain. It only wasted about a half hour, but it definitely messed with my groove.
The Feast Layer. Oh my god, the Feast Layer. This is by far the most gargantuan and obnoxiously big area in the entire game. And frankly, it's one of my favorites for its theming. It's a lot of fun to play like a normal person. But for what I'm doing, look how much there is to do here! It's just ridiculous! And it's not even that it was just big, but there was a new terrain type that I wasn't a fan of, the muck. This green phlegm crap can only be destroyed with salt, meaning that there's no way to use the elephant or even DK's punches to get rid of it. While there wasn't a lot of muck in 1400, there was enough of it that I had to be really careful of how much salt I was sucking up. I always had to look around and ensure I got rid of the muck first, or it'd be impossible to get rid of without resetting all the terrain. And oh my god, the walls. The entire layer is surrounded by these absurdly tall walls of meat that I just had to suck up. I'd have to imagine I spent like, what, at least 2 hours on just the walls? You know, I'm kind of wondering which layer took longer. Was it this one or the canyon? Both layers were several hours of time, but the Feast layer also had the muck and way more walls to clean up. Every time I looked at the minimap, it felt like I wasn't making any progress. The scope of the Feast layer was a 4-course meal. I spent a couple hours working on the terrain that I could visibly see, only to realize that I just finished like 10% of the entire map. If I didn't make it clear enough somehow, this layer took forever, but I was able to clear it all up. Even with all the terrain gone, it was still absolutely massive to walk through. It's surprising just how big one of the later levels in the game even are. But I wasn't done yet. I still had to tackle 1401, and this is where I ran into some problems. You know that muck that I wasn't a fan of before? Well, it's everywhere now. And yeah, I mean everywhere. The muck is dripping off the ceiling. It's found in clumps in the walls. You couldn't escape it. I had no choice but to very meticulously throw salt at each and every muck pile. But that's when I ran into a problem. Have you noticed that the muck isn't going away despite throwing all this salt at it? See, this happens with all the terrain in the game when it's stuck in tight corners, but normally you can use a DK punch or the elephant to suck up any pieces that are being stubborn. I don't have that option with the muck, and believe me, I tried everything. I approached the muck at different distances. I used the elephant balls, DK chunks, Pauline shouts, different types of transformations, you name it. There's no clothing in the game to make you immune to muck either. All I could do was take less damage, but I still couldn't attack it with anything but the salt. And while I could clear out some of the muck, a lot of it was just impossible to reach. No matter how many different angles I'd approach it at, if muck was stuck between pipes or trapped in a wedge, it wasn't going away. So I believe this is the first layer where it's actually not possible to smash everything.
The Forbidden layer has only a single sublayer consisting of a hallway and then multiple relatively small floating islands and platforms and 2 big sections that seem simple. You know, it should be easy, but it was actually one of the more frustrating levels I had to tackle. The reason was, to put it simply, concrete. The majority of this layer's terrain is concrete, which is one of the game's strongest materials. It can only be destroyed with a sturdy chunk as a weapon, Kong Bananza's attacks, explosives, and Snake Bananza's meteor punch. What's worse, this layer's concrete contained little to no gold, and basically no treasure chests, meaning I was constantly running out of Bananergy. Like in the forest layer where I relied on regenerative apple juice, I was chugging melon juice nonstop. It also, of course, has the added difficulty of vast expanses of open air, great for wasting balloons. The giant areas created by securitones on my first visit also made things kinda complicated. Any chunk you toss into these areas leaves behind an arc of blue crystalline passage stone. This applies to chunks you throw, but also chunks you may accidentally dislodge from friendly fractones, and knock back while breaking through concrete. Passage stone is very brittle, so it's quick to clean up, but it got pretty messy at times. All that said, this layer was one of the last ones I tackled, and I utilized all of the strategies I'd come up with along the way. The end result was pretty cool, but I was also very glad to have finally finished my part of this challenge.
And last but not least, we have the planet core. This world has 10 areas, so I already knew this was gonna take quite a long time. Starting at 1600, I went to this island behind me. Following that was the K. Rool statue, and for some reason, my tracker was way off and I had to aim above the statue to collect the rock. I have no idea why this was happening. I'd have to assume it had something to do with the cameras. And that's when I realized that there were a bunch of random islands, so I used the ostrich to reach them, suck up the terrain, and teleport back to the beginning. It was kind of annoying having to do that a bunch of times, but the rest of the ground was spikes, so I didn't have much of a choice. The rest of this area was pretty insignificant. I just sucked up a lot of stone and moved on. 1601 was also a lot of stone, but involved the same strategies as before. 1602 was a bit different, considering it's technically an auto-scroller. There wasn't even that much stuff to suck up. It was just a small handful of bushes and spike balls. I just used the elephant's balls and a bit of sucking to take care of the job. The auto-scrolling didn't even matter, considering I could teleport back to the beginning. 1603 was also pretty basic. There was barely anything to destroy. The real problem, however, was 1604, and that's because surrounding this area was nothing but thorns. And here's the problem with that. There are no outfits that make you immune to them, meaning that they aren't climbable without dying in a few seconds. Sure, you can swap outfits to take less damage to thorns, but I wasn't really going to be able to touch them at all. And just look at how many thorns there are. There's barely any skeleton platforms, and only a couple of them are high in the air. I genuinely had no idea how to tackle this, so I had to do a good bit of experimenting. I started by spamming Pauline's shouts, which, while slow, was a good way to eliminate the thorns high in the air. The problem, however, was just how many thorns were below the platforms that, again, I can't stand on, and I could barely even reach them with Pauline. I was able to use the elephant and get some stuff close by, but that was about it. I tried taking one of the thorn balls and rolling around on the thorns, and while I didn't get hurt this way, I wasn't able to suck up anything either. Now, of course, I could do dirt stacking with Pauline, but I didn't know how that was going to help me reach the thorns underneath me. So I decided to at least go to the other platforms that I could stand on and use as much Pauline shouts as I could. This took forever, but I was able to get rid of a nice chunk of the thorns at least. But then I had an idea. I started jumping off the platforms and aiming down while sucking with the elephant. Because I've maxed out my stats, his reach was far enough to the point that I was able to clear out a nice chunk of thorns each time I did this. That's when I realized that Pauline's dirt stacking actually would be useful. I started to make a nice little line, and then I could jump off the top of that and get a ton of distance to suck up all the thorns in front of me. The only part of the strategy that was kind of obnoxious was the balloon would always spawn me back to the beginning, meaning I'd have to jump back to my dirt pile every single time. But it was actually working. And it was working fast. Whenever I couldn't reach any more thorns, I'd just make the dirt pile go out farther and farther. The dirt managed to get so tall that I was at a point in which I couldn't jump anymore. It was strange. For some reason, I'd roll off the dirt, but I just wasn't allowed to jump. It didn't really matter because I was getting the distance I needed, but I'm assuming that this was happening because my tall dirt pile was touching the skybox in the area, and maybe that was breaking DK's controls a bit. So after about 3 hours, I somehow managed to clear out all of 1604. It took so long, but it was really fun figuring out a strategy to clear out all the terrain. Moving on to 1605, it was a pretty small level. There were 2 different areas, and it wasn't all that complicated to smash them up. 1606 was more or less the same experience. Frankly, all these levels have started to feel the same after doing this for such a long period of time. 1607, however, was a bit of a different story. There was a ton of gold to break that was over a floor of spikes. I was able to throw gold to get rid of most of it, although they were in very limited quantities. That was the least of my worries though, as I was now approached with a long hallway that's filled to the brim with thorns. The majority of these thorns could be sucked up, but some of them needed Pauline shouts. However, the ending had thorns that were so large and so high up that not even Pauline could reach them. Considering that I didn't have much to work with, I had no choice but to make another big dirt stack with Pauline to get more height. This took a significant amount of time, but I didn't have much of a choice. There was absolutely no other way to reach these thorns, and it took a couple hours to clear everything out. Moving on to 1608, it was a little funky since there were some platforms to reach without skeletons. You normally use a minecart to blast them away, but I wanted to try to do this minecartless. And yes, you can reach them all with some ostrich jumps. There was also a ton of gold above more spiky floors, which was pretty annoying to deal with. I tried brute forcing it with DK, but ended up using Pauline because I was tired of dying every 30 seconds. And finally, last but not least, is 1609. And honestly, it was more of the same thing. Blow up the gold over the spikes and suck up the rest. Something I did find interesting is that when you approach the final boss pipe, the camera is forcefully focused on that pipe and nothing else. This made getting the gold behind the camera a little irritating, but if you ran far enough behind it, you'd get control of the camera again. I can't recall any other point in the game where the camera auto-locks onto something, at least when it comes to these worlds themselves. So in conclusion, you can't smash everything in Donkey Kong Bonanza. But I mean, close enough, right? Outside of the monkey snot in Sublayer 1401, everything else can actually be smashed to smithereens. I wouldn't recommend it, but you technically can do it if you have way too much free time. And with that, thanks for watching, and thanks to D-Pad Gamer for helping out with this video.